Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was Isekai'd into Overlord New World? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Stranger Under a Red Sky. The sky was the color of spilled pomegranate, layered clouds catching the sun as if the day itself had been cut open. Wind hissed across the tall grass and carried the stink of iron and fear. Naruto blinked grit from his eyes, a ringing in his ears fading to the thud of boots and the panicked clatter of a wagon wheel bumping along on a cracked axle. He had the stupidest thought as he staggered upright, not again. The second thought was a child's scream. He moved before the world made sense, body running on instincts older than reason. A wagon pitched against a rut, horses wild-eyed and foaming. Drivers hauling on reins with white knuckles. Behind them came men in mismatched armor, helms draped in scraps of white cloth like bandages. A censer swung on a chain from the hand of a pale priestess, its smoke coiling low and thick. And the hymn she hummed crawled over the grass like frost. Arrows fell in a hiss. Naruto's hands moved. One seal, two, shadows peeled off him and sprinted. Three Nes grabbed children and lifted them bodily over the wagon rail. Another slammed into a raider's chest with a crack of shoulder-meeting breastplate. The fifth clone barely formed before it broke like a bubble. Not smoke. Static. Popping across Naruto's skin. He swore under his breath and slid under a wild horse kick. The hymn had a taste. Metal and salt and something like burned sugar. It ran under his skin and the air felt wrong. Chakra moved, but not like water in a pipe, more like rain striking a hot stone and hissing away. Left flank. Drop them. One of the raiders barked. They wore porcella, in tokens on cords at their throats, and the whites of their eyes shone in a way that wasn't zeal so much as practiced certainty. A woman with short dark hair was on top of the wagon, a knife in each H. And in her expression set to a dangerous calm. She kicked a raider in the mouth, split a second man's ear with a thrown blade, and shouted down into the press, "Move, move, move. Keep the littles low and the strong ones pushing." "Who's in charge?" Naruto asked as he caught a spear on his forearm guard and snapped the shaft with a twist, sending the head spinning away. She spared one blink of surprise as he materialized by her wheel well like a trick of the light. "Me, until you die doing something heroic and stupid. Don't make me right. Deal later," Naruto said, grinning even as blood ran warm down his ribs. "What's with the humming ghost?" The woman's mouth tightened. "Choir. Don't breathe the smoke if you can help it." She jerked her chin at the pale priestess. "Break the chain, the field breaks." "Okay." Naruto's grin didn't dim. "I like simple." He breathed out and felt for the familiar. Wind catching in the lungs, the ground's pulse under his feet, the tug of his own energy coiling. The hymn pressed fingers over his ears from the inside. The clones he'd made rippled and frayed, their edges fuzzing, but they were buying seconds. Enough. He flickered forward. The priestess saw a blond man in a torn orange jacket moving through bodies as if the fight had been choreographed for him. He wasn't graceful. Not exactly. Grace was what you called it from the outside, but every step fit the next. And every hand he set on someone put them where they needed to be, behind a wheel, under cover, out of the arrow line. The censer came up on the swing. Naruto caught the chain with the back of his wrist and felt the hymn try to get inside his bones. The chain burned. He tightened fingers, hauled, and the priestess stumbled into him. He gave her a look like he was tired of people throwing things in his face and jerked the chain short, elbowed her in the shoulder to knock the breath out of her. Her acolyte stabbed at his kidney. He flowed around it, kicked the acolyte's knee sideways. And because he was Naruto, he didn't follow up with something that would break the man beyond repair. He spun the censer once and let it clang on the ground. The hymn didn't stop. It shifted. A second voice took it up. Higher, thinner. Naruto's head turned toward the wagons where another cleric was tucked behind an upturned crate, mouth moving, eyes nearly closed. A young woman, hair pinned back in a neat coil. Throat working on the notes with a singer's control. That voice didn't push. It folded. "Smoke's a dampener." Someone coughed. "The air, it sticks." "I got it," Naruto said between his teeth. And he didn't know how he had it, but he could feel it, his chakra snagged in the smoke like burrs in wool. Fine, fine, he could fight without flowing a river by brute force. Hey, he called, to the neat-haired singer as a raider came over the wagon edge like a spider. You're better than this. She didn't look at him. Her fingers clenched on the hem of her robe and one note in the hymn SL. It just enough that the raider's boot caught on a bent nail, buying a heartbeat. Naruto moved through the heartbeat. He was fast, but speed was a language. He spoke it like a native. The raider swung. Naruto stepped inside and let the blade whisper past his back, then rapped knuckles to temple with just enough force to turn the lights down but not off. The singer flinched when he reached her. He took her wrist. Gentle, but he took it. And the hymn stuttered. Please, she said, the word barely audible. They'll. Arrows hissed again, a volley that would have cut them both. A clone threw itself up like a wall and burst, static prickling Naruto's skin, the air tasting like copper and storm, and the arrows fell crooked around them. Don't sing their song, Naruto said, and he didn't know her name. But he knew that mouth pulled tight with duty and fear. He'd seen it in mirrors, in friends. Sing your own. Her throat worked. She swallowed. Then the hymn shifted a second time. It didn't stop. It bent, sliding under the other as a counter line, the smoke eddies thinning, the pressure on his chakra easing fractionally. Better, Naruto said, and flashed her a grin that felt like sunlight he didn't have time for. Thanks. He dropped over the wagon side, caught a spear with his knee and pulled the man down into the mud. A clone stepped in to relieve him, and he went low, sweeping two more from their feet. Someone threw a net. He walked out of it like a whisper. Who is he? A raider demanded, panic in his throat. A blasphemy, the priestess spat, scrambling back to her censer. He's the kind we were warned of. Naruto didn't love that word. He'd been called demon enough to be bored of it, but the way she said it, like it was a category, lit a quiet suspicion in the back of his skull. He didn't have time for quiet. He didn't have time for anything but a ball of chakra in his palm, spiraling into life. It fought him. A Rasengan usually sang the way birds sang, something that happy. Ned when everything aligned and your hand held the right kind of sky. This one bucked like a horse that hated the bit. The hymn's pressure skated along the top of it and made it shimmy, unstable, dangerous. He laughed anyway. The laugh wasn't pride, it was relief. If it could fight him, it existed here. Let's dance, he told the air. He ran it under the censer and hit the ground just ahead of the priestess's hand. The Rasengan ate dirt, throwing clods and tearing a divot, and when he rose the censer's chain lay in the torn earth and the censer itself rolled smoking to a stop. The priestess's mouth opened. Her words were going to be religious and mean. Naruto hit her in the jaw. She slumped, breath hitching, alive. A horn sounded, thin and reedy, the kind you used to say you were leaving because you didn't like the odds anymore. The raiders pulled back in clumps, shields up, dragging their fallen. One of them tossed something black and glossy onto the dirt at Naruto's feet as he retreated. Not a threat, a message. Rin, the knife thrower atop the wagon, dropped to the ground and shook blood off her fingers like water. That's new, she said, eyeing the token. You don't usually get a calling card with your attempted murder. Quote. Naruto bent, picked it up. It was porcelain, black as a new bruise, and in the glaze were lines that made his eyes slide if he tried to make sense of them. As the mark didn't want to be remembered accurately. You know them? He asked. I know of them. Rin tucked hair behind an ear with a flick that was more irritated than flirty. Revelation Choir. The soft voice of hard men. If you see the black, someone decided the gods would like you dead. I'm Rin Ashford. She glanced at his bleeding side. You're leaking on my ground. He looked down at the cut that had soaked his jacket. He'd been ignoring it, and his shirt clung. It's very stylish, he said. As Rantel still, that way. You fell out of the sky and asked me a geography question, Rin said, thoroughly unimpressed. Yes, it's that way. You're not going to make it walking if you keep using your insides as outsides. I've had worse, Naruto said. I'm Naruto. Of course you are, Rin said. Naruto. All right, Naruto. Since you apparently don't believe in bleeding later, do you believe in getting these people moving now? Plan. Minimal screaming, maximum distance. Her eyes flicked to the neat-haired singer. who had her hands tucked into her sleeves like she wanted to disappear. And minimal hymns. The singer felt the look like a hand, and her chin came up with a flicker of pride and fear trying on the same face. Naruto met her eyes. "Hey," he said gently. "Thanks for the counterline." She flinched. "I didn't." She stopped, swallowed. "Selvi Anselm," she said in a voice trained to be heard over candle smoke. "I would like to help these people reach the city." Rin's eyebrows rose. "Braver than you look, choir girl." Selvi's mouth pressed thin. "Probably not. Most brave things feel like that," Naruto said. He hauled himself into the wagon with a grunt and then hopped down again a second later to steady a child who had decided now was the time to try and help push a wheel. "Rin, what? Tell me where you want them." For a second, the woman who'd just saved a dozen lives like she was balancing a ledger had to adjust to someone taking orders from her without fuss. Then she did what competent people did when they didn't have time for proving games. She pointed, and Naruto moved, and the caravan started to roll. They put a mile under the wagon wheels before. The sky purpled and the first stars argued their way past the bruised light. The wind carried the way a prayer keeps moving after it stops being words. Every bone in Naruto's body felt the day like a weight, pleasant and honest. He had a slice under his ribs and a dozen scrapes that would be bruises tomorrow, and his chakra sat in him like a dog that had run too hard and now lay panting with its head on its paws. They made a circle with the wagons in a shallow dip of ground. Fires started small and stayed that way. Children fell asleep mid-complaint. Rin took stock like a practiced thief counting spoons, injuries, supplies. What could be scavenged? Selvi moved among the blankets with a small lamp and slow hands, her hymn reworked into something like a lullaby that didn't have sharp edges. When she passed Naruto, he pretended not to notice the quick look she gave the cut along his side. She pretended not to notice that he noticed. They pretended together until Rin clucked her tongue and shoved a rolled shirt into Naruto's hands. "Take your jacket off," she said. "Yes, I know you like it. Yes, it probably has a story. Either you let me clean that or I watch you pass out with the comedic timing of a drunk uncle." "Do you have drunk uncles?" Naruto asked, obeying even as he winced pulling orange off his shoulder. He laid the jacket beside him on the grass like a friend that would stay where you put it. "I had a lot of uncles," Rin said. "Most of them were temporarily related to the bottle." She crouched, wetted a cloth, and didn't bother with ritual or apology. The cloth bit. Naruto hissed and then grinned at himself for hissing. "You don't sing," he said. "I don't sing," Rin agreed. "My mother did. My brothers tried. I inherited sharp things and an attitude problem." She dabbed more gently for a breath. "You fight like a man who likes standing between things. I don't recommend it in the long term." "It's worked so far," Naruto said. He glanced across the circle where Selvi's lamp light turned faces soft. "Sometimes you stand somewhere so someone else has a chance to start." Rin's eyes shifted to him, assessing, not unkind. "And what do you start?" "Whatever's next," he said simply. When the worst of the dirt was out and the bleeding had calmed, he set his hands hovering over the cut. Green light should have spread. It did, but thin, flickering, a ribbon instead of a sheet. The energy ran along his palms and then guttered like a lantern with a hole in it. Rin's eyebrows went up. That looked like it wanted to be impressive and then remembered we live here. "Feels like trying to drink soup with a fork," Naruto admitted. He steadied the trickle and knitted what he could. It was less than he wanted. It would have to be enough. Rin bound the rest in neat layers. "There. Try not to somersault into any more blades tonight." "No promises," he said, but he meant to try. He thanked her, genuinely. She shrugged, like that made them even for the thing he done he didn't think counted as anything but obvious. He wandered the perimeter after that, talking to the horses in low tones suited to calming something big and tense. The stars were different shapes here, he'd noticed that once. And then decided it didn't matter, the sky was still stubborn about being above him. At the far edge of the circle, where the grass leaned toward the dark shape of hills, he made 3 seals and held the last one too long, feeling the pressure at his temples and the unhappy way chakra tried to slide out of his fingers and into the ground. A clone puffed into being. No smoke. That crackle again, a prickling in the air, the hair on his arm lifting. The clone grimaced at him. That felt weird, it said. Yep, Naruto said. The clone looked at the hills, then at sleeping kids bundled under one of the wagons. It didn't need orders. It didn't need more words than the small salute they shared, easy, inherited. It loped toward the hills to watch. He tried another. This one lasted a little longer before the hymn that wasn't present anymore seemed to echo in its bones and it popped with a hiss like a match dying in rain. All right, he told the empty air. Different rules. New game. He stood there with the wind sneaking fingers under his shirt and the night pressing cool palms to his face, and he lined his breath up with the ground's slow exhale. He'd leer. Ned wants to listen to trees that couldn't speak. He could learn to listen to this place, too. Maybe it didn't want to kill him. Maybe it did. Either way, he could learn the steps. Do you always make friends with the dirt? Rin said behind him, quiet so as not to carry. Only when it hums at me, Naruto said. He tossed her a look over his shoulder. Everything okay? We moved the worst wounded to the second wagon, she said. Your choir girl put 3 kids to sleep by humming at them and didn't cry afterward, which is impressive composure. We had to burn one of the dead horses. She didn't okay away from the darkness beyond the fire glow. They left that token on purpose. He took the porcelain out of his pocket and set it in his palm. It looked harmless there, like a weird piece of jewelry. What do you know about them? He asked. Rin's laugh had no humor in it. They make lists. They believe in tidy endings. If a god sneezes, they figure out whose fault it was and whose throat will fix the weather. Do they usually sing? Naruto asked. They like to make the air feel like your mouth forgot how to swallow, Rin said. They'll be back, if they think you're worth a hymn. She glanced at him sideways. Are you worth a hymn, Naruto? I've been worth a lot of worse things, he said, smiling. I'll walk you to Rantel. She snorted. You don't even know if that's where we're going. You're going where the trouble is smallest and the wall is tallest, he said. That's a city. Rin's shoulders eased a fraction. It is. And I hate heroes. Bad for business. They leave. She looked at him in the star hum. They make promises and then they discover that fate has other plans and they put their capes on and disappear. I don't own a cape, Naruto said. Then, quieter, I stick. He didn't say it with pride. He said it like a thing that cost him something and he'd carry the receipt in his pocket forever. Rin looked at him for a while. All right, she said. Stick, then. Night thinned toward morning and the fires burned down to ember talk. Naruto catnapped in snatches. He'd learned to take sleep the way you took handouts when you were starving, grateful and a little embarrassed. He woke to Selvi seated a yard away, lamp beside her dimmed to a bowl of light. I wanted to thank you, she said without preface, staring at the porcelain token in his hand. For what? Naruto asked. For telling me to sing my own. She twisted the edge of her sleeve. I usually only obey. That sounds exhausting, he said. It is tidy, she said, with a ghost of a smile. Which is a cousin to exhausting. They'll come for me, too. The smile fell. I don't know if I will be brave again. You were brave when it mattered, Naruto said. He thought about every time he'd been brave long enough to set the conditions so he wouldn't have to be, and how it never stuck. If you can't be later, we'll be it for you. That's not how. She stopped, eyes uncertain. I know it's not how it's supposed to work, Naruto said. And yet, he tipped the token toward her. What's it say? Nothing, she said. That's the point. It's meant to be a mark you remember without remembering. They say, end them when they want fear to do the walking for them. Naruto put the token in his jacket pocket. Then we'll make fear walk slow. Her mouth twitched. Do you plan to fight them alone? I plan to get these people to a wall, he said. Then I plan to see who wants to help. You think anyone will? Selvi said, not entirely skeptical. More like a child who wanted to be told a bedtime story about the world choosing you back. People surprise me, Naruto said. Usually by being better than they think. Selvi's lamp seemed warmer for a breath. Good night, she said, standing. Or whatever piece of it you haven't used. Good night, he said, and watched her go like she was a small brave boat in a river and he was hoping for weather that didn't capsize her. Dawn came up pale and cold and turned gold like a coin you felt in your hand and hated to spend. Naruto stretched the stiffness out and jogged the perimeter again, checking for footprints that didn't belong to them. He found one set that matched none of the raiders' boots. The stride was too even, the weight careful. Whoever had made those marks had watched them from the ridge and kept their breath tucked inside their chest, invisible even to morning. He looked up at the ridge. It was empty now but for a smudge of cloud shaped like a helmet. He rubbed the back of his neck. Something with patience had been measuring him. Wheels, Rin called. It's a good morning to not be here. They rolled. The ruts were fresh where the raiders had come and gone, and the road did that thing roads do when they've been used by people who made promises about maintenance and then forgot, running straight until they remembered a hill and then deciding to detour after all. Naruto walked beside the second wagon and put a hand on the slat, the woodworm under his palm. When the children cracked half open to peer out, he made a face and got giggles like a bag of coins. He liked that sound better than hymns. He liked a lot of sounds better than hymns. They stopped at midday in the shadow of a stand of trees where the grass bent lower and the ground smelled like old leaves. Rin went to confer with the drivers. Naruto drank water and D tried to pretend he liked the taste of the metal cup. Selvi lingered at the edge of the shade, looking at the open field like it might start singing at her. Will they come today? She asked. Probably, Rin said, appearing with a strip of dried meat and another of sarcasm. But I think they're busy licking the places he kicked. Selvi's eyes slid toward Naruto's side. He's still bleeding. Not in the dramatic way, Rin said. Which is a pity. I would have liked to tell the story later and have people cry in the right places. You tell stories? Naruto asked. I sell them, Rin said. But for this one I'm taking a loss. They were still laughing when the horn sounded again. One note, farther off, and the wind carried a smell like hot metal. The raiders had circled wide and were coming careful. The hymn already simmering at the edge of hearing. Naruto clenched his hand and felt the Rasengan try to buck again. He didn't need it. He didn't not need it. He looked at Selvi. She lifted her chin. I will sing, she said. Mine. Quote. Good, Naruto said, and he felt the strange thing that happened to him in war. The edges of his fear went clean, the panic left, the world became rooms he could move through and put people into. He clapped Rin on the shoulder and winked at the children peering through the slats again. Stay down, he told them. If a horse suggests a plan, don't listen. The second fight was faster. They knew each other a little now. Naruto let the hymn show its ugly mathematics and moved through the gaps Selvi made with a precision that would have made any old sensei nod. Rin cut where cutting saved lives. Not where it broke stories. The raiders broke earlier than they had and fell back toward the ridge, hissing curses and promises. One of them, wild-eyed, turned at the edge of the range and threw another token. It clinked on the ground like a dropped tooth. Naruto didn't pick this one up. He watched the ridge. Something gleamed there, just for a breath, a figure. Standing too still to be a man who got tired, armor catching the sun in a way that made it look like the sun had been shaped into a person. The figure held something, crystal, maybe, that winked and then dimmed. As if it had swallowed what it wanted. Naruto shaded his eyes. The figure didn't move. The wind shifted. When he looked again, the ridge held only grass. Friend of yours? Rin asked. Not quite casual. Not yet, Naruto said. Good, Rin said. You make bad friends and they tend to try and break my wagons. Naruto grinned, and the grin felt the way the sun felt when it caught the dust in the air and turned it into glitter no one had paid for. Then he sobered, because children still needed water and horses still needed calming and Selvi still had to breathe through the way her Voic. He had been used like a weapon and he had to keep the promise he hadn't made out loud. Irantel. A wall, a space in which to decide the next thing. In the lull, Selvi came to him with her hands clenched around an empty cup. They will gather more, she said. If you are what they say, if you are a deity class anomaly, they will not stop. I'm a person, Naruto said, heat under his voice he hadn't meant to let out. He followed it with a small apology with his eyes, because Selvi didn't deserve the heat he had for men with lists. And I've been a lot of inconvenient things in a lot of places. It's fine. It's not fine, Selvi said. And there was steel under her gentleness. But we will make it so enough people can pretend it is. He laughed softly. I'll take that. They moved again when the sun had leaned halfway down the sky. The ridge stretched like a spine at their back. The armored figure didn't appear again, but there were birds who refused to land on that slope for the next mile and a half. Toward evening, they glimpsed the first smudge of city on the horizon, the way cities always announce themselves first with birds and then with a taste of smoke that isn't fear. The children went quiet with the tired relief that comes when an end appears, and even the horses flicked their ears like they could count. Naruto walked and matched his breath to the wheel squeak and thought abo. The silver figure on the hill and the neat-haired singer and the woman with knives and the way the world had made his chakra feel like a guest in its house. He thought about capes and leaving and tea. Way promises get made and kept and broken. He thought about how easy it had always been to decide to be brave for 15 seconds and how hard it was to be someone's ordinary for 15 days. He decided to be ordinary for these people. He decided to be loud for them only when the loudness would buy quiet later. Night came early under banked clouds. They made another ring of wagons and kept the fires even smaller. Rin passed him a bowl of something that might once have been a stew and now was a fun memory of stew. He ate it like it had saved his life and told it so. She rolled her eyes. V sang the kind of song that sounds like water remembering how to be a river. On the ridge, a silver silhouette watched them, unmoving, a crystal eye in its hand drinking the light. Inside the armor, a voice like winter counted the beats of a man's heart from a mile away and made a small mark on a ledger that measured threats against tomorrows. Naruto looked up and felt measured. He smiled toward the measuring like a challenge offered across a bar. Don't start a duel with the sky, Rin said around her spoon. Wouldn't dream of it, Naruto said. I'm saving that for a day I'm bored. You're never bored, not when I'm with the right people. He said it without looking at her, and that made it mean more. The wind shifted again, smelling faintly of city and faintly of rain. Naruto lay down, with his jacket rolled under his head and his hand on the pocket with the black token. He slept with his face turned toward the ridge and dreams of songs that weren't hymns. On the hill, the silver figure finally turned and went away, leaving footprints that looked like decisions. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The choir sings in knives. Dawn found them in the gray before color, when the world is all BR. Ethan promise and the first bird hasn't remembered its job. Naruto stood at the edge of the wagon circle with his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket and his eyes on the ground like it might tell him a secret if he waited politely. He wasn't still often. He could be. People mistook motion for impulse, quiet for thought. He'd learned there was a kind of thinking that only happened when our body shut up and let the world speak. He inhaled slow, set his breath to match something low and tidal beneath the dirt. It wasn't chakra, not exactly, but it resonated. He rolled a clone off his hands the way you roll dough off your palms, expecting soft rise, and got a sharp hiss as the duplicate arrived with that prickle again, like a sweater fresh from a storm. Morning, the clone said, wincing. Still by tea. Still by tea. Naruto agreed. They fell into a rhythm. Clone, hold, watch it start to fray at the edges like a wet page, dismiss before it popped and made his skin itch. Clone, hold, adjust the moment of formation a hair later, like waiting for a wave you couldn't see but felt, then watch it last a few breaths longer. Someone else would have called it training. Naruto called it haggling with a place that didn't owe him anything. He was good at haggling with fate. Rin showed up with 2 tin cups of something, one of which might have been tea in its youth. She wore fatigue, like jewelry, and had braided her hair back without a mirror, which made the braid better for it. She handed him the cup and leaned on the wagon with the kind of posture that says I'm working while pretending to lean. You look like you're trying to romance the ground, she said. I'm setting boundaries, Naruto said. He took a sip and tried not to make a face. It's complicated. I can introduce you to simpler hobbies, Rin said. Counting coins, for instance. You hold them. They behave. Coins don't laugh, Naruto said, and then realized that sounded weirder than he intended. He shrugged. Thanks for the tea. You're welcome, Rin said, then nodded at the soft flare as another clone arrived and didn't immediately fuzz out. As that progress. Half a poem, Naruto said. I think there are tides here. Lines that like being crossed at specific times. If I birth the clone between them, the world minds me less. Rin's mouth twisted. You say words sometimes and I think, Ah yes, a normal man. Selvi drifted over like someone trying to look like she had a reason to be where she wanted to be anyway. The morning made her look younger. Maybe she was. Her hands were clasped as if they were thinking about prayer on their own. I tried a different interval on the counter hymn, she said, no hello, but it fit. Not higher. Just, less obedient to the dominant line. If one of you, she glanced at the clone, blinked. Recovered. Walks through it, does it make your edges hold? Let's try, Naruto said. He took a step. Selvi's voice slid out soft, no religion in it, only skill. The sound laid itself over the air like a hand-smoothing cloth. Naruto walked into it, and for a breath the clone's outline sharpened. The hiss at its edges dulled. It held for 3 more heartbeats than the last one had before it popped. Not with a static bite but with a sigh. Selvi's face lit as if someone had reminded her she owned her mouth. Oh, she said, and then almost laughed. She held it down, but it showed in the corners of her eyes. That's the sound of a plan, Rin said, satisfied. We'll need it, because, Naruto asked. He already knew. He liked to let people name their own bad weather. Because the ford's ahead, Rin said, and if I were a zealot with a smoke machine, I'd set it where the water tells you where your feet can go and nowhere else. Zealots with smoke machines, Naruto said. You should write plays. I do, Rin said. They're short. Everyone dies except the one who learns something. Dark, Naruto said. Efficient, she said. They rolled out with the S. Untrying on colors like a girl rating a dresser. The road narrowed, the grass gave way to a ribbon of water that flashed thin and fast over brown stones. A broken bridge sulked 50 paces downstream. Its middle dropped like a missing tooth. The ford wasn't bad, if you liked your ankles suspicious. The wagons would make it, if nothing panicked and no one chose that moment to find religion. The wind changed. Naruto felt it like a hand at his neck and lifted his head. The hymn came in thin at first, then found a throat. It wasn't loud. Loud would have been kind. This slid in under your breath. And took the chair your courage had been using and asked if it minded sharing. Rin didn't wait for the first arrow. She shouted, down, and kids went flat like they'd been trained. Drivers tightened their grip, eyes going big. Selvi's shoulders bunched. She licked her bottom lip like a singer caught between 2 orchestras and chose. She sang, not their song, hers. The raiders crested the low ridge on the far side. Porcelain black at their throats like ridiculous jewelry you only wore to remind people you could afford it. The censer came last, swaying. Smoke scrolled out in pretty ribbons that were not pretty when they touched your lungs. Naruto stepped forward and the smoke made his skin feel like a kettle at boil. He narrowed his eyes, breathed slow, kept his chakra from surging in dumb defiance. He didn't need a river. He needed a cup at the right moment. Left wagons first, he said, and clones spilled out around him. Not many, not sloppy, each born like a word you were proud to say. They went to the horses, to the kids, to the edges where the hymn's pressure bend was highest. Arrows came. He took one out of the air because sometimes you do tricks in war so people remember impossible as allowed. He snapped the shaft and left the head hooked in his palm to remind himself that he could bleed and would if he got stupid. The first raider came too close. Naruto put him down with a sweep and a heel and the kind of throw you use when you want a man to sit and rethink his relationship to his knees. To his right, a clone dropped, hissed, and he grimaced as the static crawled along his forearm, less than yesterday. Selvi's counterline had teeth now. The censer bearer was smarter than the last one. He kept distance, swung the smoke to lay a sheet along the water, weaponizing the ford. The hymn woman, a different cleric, older, locked her eyes on Selvi and tried to shame her with notes sharp enough to cut cloth. Selvi stood on a rock with her lamp voice reshaped to be low and sure. She didn't sing louder, she sang truer, and the air around the left wagon stopped feeling like someone else's mouth. Rin's knives moved in glints that only existed in the eyes of men who sudden Why had less ear than they'd been born with. She didn't waste motion, didn't improvise for applause. She stowed a blade in a raider's shoulder and kicked another squarely between the legs. The quiet oof he made her smile like a little girl who had guessed a riddle. Censor, she shouted, eyes flicking to Naruto. On it, he called, and then the smoke surged, thicker, rolling like a tide with an agenda. The censer bearer had help. A second censer, hidden behind a shield, its chain whipped by a man with bald knuckles and a prayer half scabbed on his cheek. Naruto swore, then laughed, then went low. He didn't aim straight for the censer. That would have been the move they wanted and had planned for, because people who love tidy endings love tidy lines. He used the ford like a friend who didn't speak your language but liked your face. He hit water with sandals and slid, momentum carrying him under a shield edge where the smoke was thinnest. A raider's boot came down for his wrist, he wasn't there. He popped up at the second censor's blind angle and drove 2 fingers into the chain link, wrenching. Pain sang up his forearm as the hymn tried to make a home in his joints. He didn't try Rasengan. He felt the name of it being watched and waited. He took the chain like you take a stubborn mule and did a thing that always made Kakashi sigh. He headbutted the man holding it. Skulls clacked. The man's eyes went soft. Naruto smiled a wrong teeth smile and let go as Rin's knife sailed by to kiss the chain and part 2 links. The censer dropped. Smoke stumbled. The hymn pitched. Off key. For a fraction, and Selvi hit that moment like a dancer taking a hand at the edge of a stage and making it look planned. Her counterline tucked under and propped the air, and Naruto felt the ground give him a fraction more respect. Push the left, he yelled. Go, go. The wagons nosed into the ford, wheels complaining, drivers talking to horses like lovers coaxed back to bed. Kids clung with white fingers and brave faces sculpted from terror. Something thumped to Naruto's right. A flare of heavy sigil work burning out like a match and leaving the afterimage of lines etched in empty air. Down. A new voice barked, and 3 raiders who had been aiming at Selvi jerked as invisible hands snatched their bows sideways. Their arrows slapped into the water with offended little splashes. She cam. Out of the tree line like she owned shade. Tall, hair in a loose knot that had been put up in a hurry and didn't care who knew it, a bandolier of inscribed plates across her chest, each humming with a different quiet. She wore leather like someone who understood that armor and lies both became heavy if you didn't take them off. She flicked her fingers and a sigil unfurled in the air with the logic of geometry and the greed of a trap. Who? Rin started. Arya, the woman said without looking at them, the syllables crisp and bored, like she'd had to introduce herself a lot and it had gotten old. Walk forward, pray later. The trap snapped. The censor's smoke hit the sigil and faltered, spiraling into a tight circle that turned back on itself and went thin. The censer bearer blinked as if someone had taken the end of his sentence away. Arya stepped sideways and etched another glyph in the air, palms moving like a conductor forcing an orchestra to remember shame. The hymn took a stutter step. Anti-undead sigils don't do that, Selvi said, startled, hearing the mode of the work even if she didn't recognize the brand of magic. They do if you program them to drink structured resonance, Arya said dryly. It's a fad. I'm ahead of it. Arrows hissed for Naruto's hip. He twisted, slapped to a side, let a third nick him as a reminder that he was not a god and did not need to act like one. He shoved through men who needed shoving and slid right as a raider with a fancy helmet tried to look important at him. Naruto looked at the helmet, decided the man had suffered enough, and tripped him into the river. Chain. Rin shouted again. She'd moved to the broken bridge, using its lip as a vantage. If that one keeps swinging, the right wagon's going to think drowning is a career move. The second censer was still up. The man holding it had learned from his friend and doubled grip, knees bent, chain whistling. Naruto flicked a look at Selvi. Her voice rose, the counterline broadened, widening the path of relatively breathable air by a hand span. He nodded at Arya. She read the nod, grimaced like she had a headache she'd planned to have tomorrow, and cut a 2-stroke sigil that slid under the chain like oil. Naruto launched. He didn't hit the censer. He hit the air around it, palms slapping into a brace position on nothing, chakra lacing fingers to make a temporary handhold. It hurt in a smart way. He pushed. The world pretended to provide a step, and he used the step to go up instead of forward. The censor's swing went under him and he let the chain brush his boot. The hymn tried to climb his leg. He told it gently to mind its business and didn't mean it. Rin's knife flashed a silver whisper and this time it wasn't the chain she severed. It was the prayer scab on the man's cheek. He recoiled. A flinch that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with someone touching the superstitions he had nailed over his fear. He turned his head. Naruto came down, with both hands on the chain in a twist that had been invented by sailors and improved by thieves. The sensor banged against rock and cracked, smoke bleeding like a gut wound. Move, Naruto bellowed, and the right wagon found legs. The raiders wavered. The hymn went shrill for a measure, the way people go when their power stops feeling inevitable and starts feeling rented. Selvi didn't gloat. Shish. Took the space she'd bought and turned her song toward the horses' ears so they wouldn't hear the fear and play along. They made the far bank. Naruto crossed last and only because he'd never learned how to do it any other way. He backed up the slope, body between the raiders and the rearmost wheel, and only turned when he reached the top and the earth flattened into the kind of ground that says, "Here, if you must, stand." Arya let the last sigil collapse and rubbed her forehead with the heel of her hand. Rin flicked a look at her and then at Naruto like she was balancing new variables in a ledger and trying to decide whether curiosity was a debt or an asset. "Thanks," Naruto said to Arya. "You looked like the least boring bet," Arya said, eyes flicking over him with clinical interest. Quote, "And if I let the choir collect your head, they would decide that meant they had a right to the rest of the market. I'm very pro-market, and yet you programmed a glyph to drink hymns," Selvi said, so mething like wonder tangled with something like distaste. "That's clever. It's theft," Arya corrected. "But then so is theology without consent." Rin snorted. "You two can have philosophy night later. For now, can you both help get these wagons moving so I don't age into dust on this hill?" They moved. The wagons groaned, the road widened again, and the valley let them go like a mouth that had changed its mind. They didn't stop until the sun had swung past the high point and the world got that generous look afternoon wears when it's too full of itself to be evening yet. A stand of poplars offered shade without secrecy. Rin laid out supplies with a speed that said she had done triage before and hated it every time. Naruto felt the ache in his muscles like a friend pressing a foot into his thigh, testing. He sat, stretched, breathed, then hauled himself up again because idle and safe in the same sentence made his skin itch. Arya watched Selvi for a minute, curiosity clean as a blade. "You used to sing for them," she said. "Not unkind." "I used to obey," Selvi said. "Those aren't the same." Arya nodded as if filing that under use later if useful, don't if not. She turned to Naruto. "So, you're the anomaly they're humming about." "I'm Naruto," he said. Arya said, as if that answered less than nothing and more than enough. Word in Rantel is that the priest started a rumor about a man who didn't belong in this world. They have a knack for weaponizing gossip. It saves arrows. Rin made a low noise in her throat. "Gossip works best when merchants carry it for free," she said. "I suddenly regret a few conversations." "Don't," Naruto said. "If people talk about me, maybe they'll trip over each other before they get to the kids." "That is a catastrophically optimistic way to treat risk," Arya said. Faintly admiring despite herself. Noted. Naruto ate something that was pretending to be bread and drank something that had the idea of apples somewhere in its ancestry. He kept moving after that because his muscles liked it better than sitting. He checked axles and retied ropes and found small stupid jobs that mattered more than monologues. The city grew in front of them like a decision. Walls in the shape of watchtowers and a smudge of smoke with a civic quality to it. Naruto felt the relief go through the caravan like a sigh welling up from 100 bodies at once. At the outer checkpoint, guards with armor polished for intimidation and a ledger polished for bureaucracy flagged them down. The captain's mustache looked like it had opinions. His eyes ticked, to the black token Rin held and then to Selvi with her singer's bearing. They ticked last to Naruto and stayed a little too long. "Names," the captain said. "And your business inside the city." "Rin Ashford," Rin said, crisp. "Professional." A woman who had practiced sounding like she was the sort of person who always had a receipt. "Caravan out of the East Road, attacked by choir zealots. We have wounded. We have coin. We'll be buying supplies and renting space and not causing your men any extra work." "And the others?" the captain asked, gesturing with his quill. "Selvi Anselm," Selvi said, steady, as if she were ascending a stage. She didn't say form or anything. She didn't say I owe you something. She just was. The captain's mouth twitched. He recognized standard bravery and perhaps respected it, and as much as a ledger could. Arya Velrun, Arya said. Cabal licensed. Anti-undead contractor. She flipped a medallion in a way designed to catch light and eyes. The captain checked its face, nodded. Filed her as useful until otherwise. And you, he said to Naruto at last. Naruto, Naruto said, helping. The captain squinted like a man trying to decide if a joke was offensive. Family name. I never needed one, Naruto said, cheerfully unhelpful and also honest. The captain opened his mouth to argue with reality, then closed it because he was paid to choose his battles. He stamped a paper, frowned at the black token, made a small sign with his thumb that might have been superstition or might have been a habit from a childhood with a grandmother who guarded doorways. Keep that hidden, he told Rin. Nodding at the token. It scares the wrong people. We prefer scaring the right ones, Rin said. But noted. Inside the walls, Rantel breathed the way cities breathe, noise layered on noise. 1,000 small ambitions rubbing together until they threw sparks. Naruto liked it. It was a living sound. The market street was a river of shouted prices and haggled laughter. And the dull thud of someone pretending to weigh a sack properly and getting caught. The smell of meat on a stick fought with the smell of someone boiling leather into soup, and neither won. Rin found them a warehouse corner with a roof that mostly persuaded rain to mind its job and a door that shut. They arranged blankets and invented privacy out of goodwill. Kids stopped being brave and became children again. Which meant someone cried loud and someone else cried quietly and nobody apologized. Selvi worked her way through the worst wounds with clean hands and a mouth that sang when she forgot to think about whether she was allowed to sing for herself. Naruto climbed to the roof, because roofs had always been honest to him. Rin followed, because she had always been the sort who checks high ground. Arya came too, because she didn't like to be where other people weren't when decisions were taking shape. The three of them stood at the edge and looked at a city pretending not to notice its own problems. Nice view, Rin said. Better company, Naruto said. Flattery. Dangerous, Rin said, deadpan. But she didn't move away from where their shoulders were a fist apart. Arya smirked. You two can write poetry later. If the choir tried an ambush outside the walls, they'll try a rumor inside. They'll find someone important and make him feel like it's his idea to be brave at the wrong target. They'll come for Selvi, Naruto said, or for the kids, for leverage. They'll come for you, Rin said quietly, not loving the accuracy. You make good theater. Then I'll make bad business for them, Naruto said. We stack the deck. Plan, Rin said, pleased, and started to tick off points on her fingers. I have 3 people who owe me favors and 1 who owes me an apology. Favo. RS are better but apologies can be converted at a decent rate. Arya leaned on the parapet and traced a sigil on the stone that immediately sank in like water soaking into thirsty dust. I can lace warehouse with a net that eats structured hymns. It will piss off any priest who tries to hum a door open or whisper at a lock. It will also make Selvi nauseous if she sings inside it, so, warning. I can practice outside, Selvi said from the stair behind them, making all 3 of them turn. She had a talent for arriving without making men feel like you had judged them for not noticing. And I can teach the children a call to sing if they get scared. It's not magic. It just gives people something to do with their fear. Rin's eyes softened a hair. You're a menace, she said. In a good way. A boy from the caravan scuttled up the stairs 2 at a time, tripped on the top step, caught himself on the doorframe, and shoved a small wrapped package at Rin like it had burned his hands. For you, he panted. A man said. He said. Ashford, and then ran like someone called his mother. Rin glanced at Naruto, at Arya, at Selvi. Then she unwrapped the package with careful fingers. Inside lay a square of metal the color of a storm. Runes crawled along its edge like ants frightened of daylight. Naruto didn't read the language but he knew the feel of message when it wanted to be not read by anyone else. Rin set it on the stone and tapped the corner. The square warmed, flickered, and then a woman's voice came out of it with dwarven vowels, low and ragged. Ashford, it said, if you're alive, listen. They came through the lower galleries like a black tide. Ironvale holds with 10 hands and 3 hammers. I can keep the central furnace from talking to the wrong tongues for a day. Maybe too. I need someone who doesn't think dying is a hobby. Rin didn't smile. That would have been crass. But her mouth remembered where the muscles for it were. Tess, she said, and something ignorant and happy flickered under her voice. She flipped the tile and found a maker's mark on the back that looked like a hammer kissing an anvil. She used to call me a walking supply chain, with this weird mix of irritation and affection. Dwarves under the mountains, Arya said. News says quarries are going dark and no one admits to losing craftsmen because that would be bad for the price of silver. Which means someone is losing craftsmen. Selvi put a hand out as if the rune tile might mind. How far? 2 days if we hire horses with ambition, Rin said. 3 if we find out ambition is a rumor. Naruto watched the tile. Then he watched Rin watching it. This is the part, he said softly, where someone sensible says we can't. We've already got a target on our backs. We should hide inside walls and pretend that makes us small enough to swallow. Rin's jaw worked. You know what I'm going to say, she said, annoyed, but not with him. With the miserable habit her heart had of being the same one every morning. You're going to say we can't, Arya said. Because you are the kind of woman who knows how to keep children alive. And when men who think they are brave pick fights with machines they haven't read the manual for. You do the paperwork. Rin laughed once, without humor and with all of it. Accurate, she said. Then she looked at Naruto. And you are going to say, what? That it's the right thing. That it's the obvious thing. Do you think that makes it easier? No, Naruto said. I think it makes it harder. But I think hard isn't a reason to say no. He spread his hands palm up, as if he were offering her something he didn't own. We get the caravan settled. We find someone inside these walls who cares about people more than fences. We build a small, mean plan. Then we go. Mean, Arya said, amused. Efficient, Naruto said, stealing Rin's earlier word. We don't go to be loud. We go to be right. Selvi's voice was very quiet. If we go, the choir will follow. Why will want to make an example of dwarves who shelter, a blasphemy, and a traitor. She said the last word plain, no apology, like someone hanging her own name on the wall where she could see it from the bed. Then we make the example cost them more than it costs everyone else, Rin said before Naruto could answer, surprising herself with how fast her mouth moved to the side of risk. She tipped rune tile with her finger and watched the light catch on etched corner. And we don't ask dwarves to stake their future on a man who fell out of the sky. We stake it on the fact that they're people. That's always paid out in my experience, on a long enough ledger. Arya's gaze slid to Naruto again, the measuring back in it. You get that if we go, you won't be allowed to be ordinary, she said. The mountains don't have convenient alleys for heroics. They have choke points and walls and no one to applaud if you get it wrong. Naruto didn't say a speech. He let the silence sit with them for a minute. He had learned the worth of silence from men who thought it was weakness. He had learned it was, sometimes, the most persuasive thing on the table. I told a woman last night I stick, he said at last. I don't leave because a cape flapped. I leave when someone tells me to and can look me in the eye and mean it. If the dwarves tell me to go, I'll go. If they ask me to stay, I'll stay. But, I'm going to get to the door where they can make that choice. Rin's eyes flicked over his face like she was reading truth for typos. Whatever she found satisfied her, because she nodded like a judge who had surprised herself by acquitting someone. All right, she said. We'll need money. We'll need quiet transport. We'll need one person inside the city who hates the theocracy in a way that makes them generous. Arya brightened in the way a woman does when business aligns with ethics in a way that might be profitable. I know a man who sells grain to the theocracy at a markup and sleeps badly about it. He will want to unburden himself by helping us. The human need to be better on Tuesdays is one of my favorite currencies. Selvi, Naruto asked. I will write a letter to a cantor who taught me how to breathe without crying. Selvi said. She is not powerful. She is not important. She is the kind of person people forget to fear. Those people save lives because importance doesn't notice they've moved the furniture. Rin's mouth did that not smile again. Good, she said. We'll need a quiet cart to take us to the Miners' Road and a loud rumor to take the choir somewhere else. I can. Start 2 rumors and sell 1 to a man who likes to think he invented eavesdropping, Arya said, brisk. He will feel professional and thus be sloppy. I will also lace the warehouse. And I'll leave a sigil with Selvi that you can plant on the inside of your sleeve. If someone tries to pull a him over your head, it will bite their hand, not yours. They broke like a team that hadn't had time to pee. Practice but had discovered choreography inside necessity. Naruto went down to the wagons and learned the names of 2 children he hadn't asked yesterday, because names are the cheapest part of respect. He found the drivers who were pretending not to be terrified by the thought of staying in a city with a rumor attached and told them 3 jokes that were not good but were told with conviction. Rin vanished into the market and came back an hour later with sacks that didn't look like sacks and new shoulders on old men who had agreed to help for reasons that seemed to surprise them. Arya fussed over the warehouse like a cat cleaning something that wasn't dirty enough and left thin lines of not magic on doorframes that only people who intended harm would feel. Evening pulled the light sideways and turned the city's sound down just enough to hear someone coming up the stairs wrong. Rin tensed. Arya's palm lifted. Naruto stood and rolled his shoulders as if to say, I am not tired even if I am. The man who entered wore the manner of messengers. Thin, tired, trying to be unnoticed by the news he carried. He held something wrapped in oiled cloth. For the woman with knives, he said, eyes flicking to Rin. Then away like it was safer not to meet hers. Truly, the brand is strong, Rin murmured, taking the bundle. She unwrapped it, and a small hammer fell into her palm, heavy for its size. Etched with the same kiss mark of hammer and anvil. Dwarf make. Under the hammer, a strip of metal stamp with a map sketched in lines only dwarves would call clear. She sent a route, Rin said, tapping 3 points. Old maintenance galleries, half collapsed, still passable if you understand how dwarves think when they're tired. Which I do, because I have been yelled at by dwarves who were tired. Payment, the messenger said. He looked like he would apologize even for being paid. Rin tossed him a small leather pouch that clinked enough to change his posture. Tell the bird who sent you tea. Hat the road is dangerous and I asked about her mother's knees, she said. The man nodded and fled, comforted by specificity. Arya leaned in to squint at the map. That second mark. There's usually a ward station there. If the choir convinced someone inside to think with their fear, that's where they'll plant a relic. Then we hit it first, Naruto said. Quiet, Rin nodded. We leave before dawn. With luck, the choir will still be writing letters to each other about how angry they are at our audacity. Luck, Arya sniffed. Cute. Selvi came up with a bundle of wrapped bread and a face that had made small decisions and was now being brave about sticking to them. I told the cantor, she said. She told me she loved me. I told her that wasn't strategic. She told me love rarely is, but it works anyway. Which sounds like terrible doctrine. Then she told me to sit and eat before I tried to outsmart sleep. Rin stared at her for a beat, then barked a laugh that had nothing to do with ridicule. Your cantor and I would get along. Night didn't fall so much as arrive at an appointment. Naruto lay down for 2 hours with his jacket under his head again and half his mind in his chest listening for the wrong footsteps. Arya's glyphs ticked faintly when you breathed on them and slept when the room did. Selvi sang once more, soft, for her own sake this time. Rin wrote something on a scrawl of paper and folded it without reading it back. They left while the city still had sleep in its eyes. The cart Rin had hired looked like a farmer's bad idea, which was perfect. The horse looked like it had opinions about every single choice any human had ever made, which was also perfect. Rin clicked her tongue, said something fond and insulting in the same breath, and the horse decided to coop. Right, because at least someone was talking sense. They hit the miner's road as the eastern sky tried out weak gold. The countryside uncurled in furrows and scrub and the kind of trees that learn to grow sideways to avoid being noticed by axes. Arya napped in shifts and woke with words already in her mouth as if she had been arguing with someone in a dream and wanted to win here instead. Selvi watched, face thoughtful, hands in her lap where she could feel them stop shaking. Mid-morning, the road narrowed into a cut where rock leaned in and the ceiling grew teeth. Naruto felt the shift the way a fish feels when the river pinches. Choke point, Rin said. 2 archers and a man with a taste for pretending to be a boulder. 3. Arya corrected, and then, as if to be polite, the third archer cleared his throat by accident. The first arrow came for the horse. Naruto caught it and pushed it back with a little spin. It hit the rock and clattered with shame. The second went for Rin's shoulder. Arya flicked a plate and the arrow remembered gravity too soon. The third aimed for Selvi's throat and meant nothing because Rin had moved without thinking and put her own shoulder there. The arrow grazed her jacket and her curse was bilingual and heartfelt. The boulder man rolled up, trying to be a legend. Naruto put a foot on his chest and made him into a cautionary tale instead. The archers considered their life choices and fled because the day was young and no one wants to waste a morning on dying. They found the first ward station behind a curtain of ivy that had been told by someone's grandmother that ivy equals secrecy. The station smelled like old iron and fear trying to pass as incense. Arya stood very still in the doorway, listening to the kind of silence that means a room is thinking about lying to you. Relic, she said, hung in the rafters to learn the sound of voices. It will scream when we make it stop. I can catch the scream, Selvi said, surprising herself, maybe. If I set a line under it and pull when it pulls. Arya's eyebrows went up. You're proposing counter-ablation. I'm proposing singing on pitch, Selvi said, a little offended. We call it listening. Rin grinned. Do it. They did. Arya threw a net of lines over the space above the rafters. Selvi set her mouth and sent a thin ribbon of sound up, barely there, patient as a silk thread. Naruto climbed with the boredom-proof grace of a man who had painted too many roofs as a kid. He reached the rafters, found the relic by feel, cold, glassy, trying to make his fingers forget they were his, and wrapped it in cloth like a cat in a towel. It jerked. Selvi's thread caught the scream and folded it a fraction. Arya's net drank the rest. Naruto dropped the bundle into Rin's waiting bag and felt the room exhale. First taste free, Arya murmured. They'll hate that we took it without paying. Rin shouldered the bag like it weighed less than the consequences. Good, she said. I love it when zealots have to do math. They moved deeper, the maintenance galleries shouldering in around them, stale breath of old air and old work. Naruto kept an eye on the ceiling because ceilings had betrayed him before. He put his palm to the stone and felt, or thought he felt, a low, stubborn hum. He smiled at it like he smiled at any creature that didn't have to love him and might anyway. By afternoon, they hit a pocket where time had pooled. A collapsed stretch of tunnel had been chewed into a passable shelf by hands that knew how to speak stone. Beyond it, the temperature shifted and the sound changed. A deeper room, not a tunnel. The way a space full of metal speaks without words. Almost there, Rin said, mostly for herself. The ambush at the ledge was less clumsy. The choir had sent better men or simply men who had learned. They had shields that didn't shine and faces that didn't care. The sensor wasn't visible. That was worse. They came up from below on hooks. Naruto met the first with a fist, the second with a heel, and the third with a shoulder that accepted the impact and gave it back with interest. Arya's plate snapped and three men forgot which way gravity worked for a breath and then remembered too late. Selvi sang her thread and pulled it breath by breath into a sheet thin as frost, laying it over the corridor to trap the sound of the hidden hymn from finding a home. The hymn didn't like that. It pushed. Selvi's mouth trembled. Naruto saw it and moved to make a space for her to stand in that wasn't under pressure, using his body and his noise and the way he could be loud without speaking. The censer bearer revealed himself from a recess and tried for Rin because zealots learn quickly who cuts the strings. Rin smiled like a fox and went low while Naruto went high. And between them the man learned that devotion doesn't improve balance. Back, Arya snapped. He's carrying a secondary. The censer's base opened like a flower and spilled a glittering dust that wasn't dust. It wasn't anything reasonable. It tasted like a hymn shredded and fed through a grinder. Selvi choked, then caught the song at a different angle and turned it, so it missed their lungs and found the rocks. The rocks took it and did not care. Rocks have excellent boundaries. They broke the relic. It bled music that died with a petulant wheeze. Two raiders fled. One tried to take Rin with him and discovered she had no patience left and a very sharp knife. After, the corridor listened to them breathe. Naruto leaned on the wall and closed his eyes for one long blink. When he opened them, Rin was looking at him the way people look at the thing they've been telling themselves not to want because wanting costs. Don't get noble on me, she said, voice rough. If you get noble, you get dead. I can't run a guild with that on my books. He laughed, and the laugh wasn't deflecting anything. No nobler than usual, he said. He touched the wall. It hummed back, or maybe that was just his hand trembling. We keep moving. They kept moving. The tunnel opened at last into a vault cut by hands that trusted the rock to remember how to be strong. The heat struck first, then the light off melted metal. Then the sound. Hammers in cadence, the language of work spoken under pressure. Dwarves moved like men who had been told they would fail and decided to be late to that appointment. In the center, a woman with arms like bridges and hair braided with bits of copper stood on a worktable shouting and forging at the same time. She saw Rin and didn't stop shouting or forging, but a grin shot through her like lightning in a tree. Ashford, she bellowed. You walking invoice. You owe me 3 bottles and a favor. Tess, Rin yelled back, delighted. I brought you a favor with legs. Tess looked at Naruto mid-hammer. Her eyes did the thing competent people's eyes do when they decide whether they have time for hope. Can you hold a peace at 1200 while the world tries to fall down? She demanded. Naruto looked at the iron glowing like dawn and smiled. I like a challenge. Good, Tess said. Grab the tongs. We're going to make something the choir will wish was blasphemy. The world narrowed to heat and timing and the kind of work that makes your arms shake while your mouth keeps up a line of words so you don't think about shaking. Naruto held. Tess struck. Sparks cheered. Arya planted sigils along the back wall that caught whispers and turned them into swallows. Selvi sang under the hammer, not loud, just enough to lay a rhythm you could build a wall on. Rin took a position by the door and made 2 men rethink hard truths about their own mortality without killing either. When the piece cooled enough to live, Tess plunged it and the steam rose like applause. He slapped the metal bracers nested together, and thrust them at Naruto with something like pride hiding under gruffness. Runes crawled along their inner surfaces, crisp and new. Put 'em on, she said. I etched stabilizers to handle energy that doesn't want to pretend it's mana. They'll bite at first. Let 'em. They're teaching you how to shake hands with the floor. Naruto slid them up his forearms. The bite was real. It was like holding a lightning bug in your fist and trusting it not to panic. He breathed with the bite, not against it. The pressure smoothed. Oh, he said, soft and stupid with relief. Oh, that's polite. Don't get sentimental, Tess said, already turning to shout at a dwarf who had decided to lose his mind near a vat. We're going to need those when the zealots come be. Act with a friend who remembers how to count. As if summoned by arithmetic, a horn cut across the vault, lower and colder than the raider's reed. Selvi's head snapped up. Arya cursed under her breath, in a language that sounded like subtracting. Rin's hand went to the token in Naruto's jacket pocket and then away, like she wanted to throw it in a furnace and knew better. From the far end of the hall, a figure stepped through the steam as if it didn't touch her. She moved like a knife that had been taught to walk. Black hair, halberd at her back like a promise, eyes quiet in a way that made noise around her seem embarrassed. The dwarves, hammering faltered without orders. The air carried the kind of hush you hear right before a fight you'll tell stories about. Zeshi tilted her head at Naru, to the way predators tilt their heads to see if you'll run. No threat in it, all threat. The theocracy's living argument, Arya murmured. Lovely. Rin's mouth went dry in a way that had nothing to do. Oh, with fear and everything to do with the math of killing. She's not paid to negotiate. Selvi's throat worked, old loyalties clawing at new choices. She didn't move toward Zeshi. That was courage of a different kind. Zeshi's gaze touched Naruto's bracers, then his eyes. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, as if volume had always felt like a lie. You keep getting up, she said, not a question. Bad habit, Naruto said, matching her quiet with something like respect you don't offer to a storm because you're scared, but because it's earned. The choir's report calls you an unlicensed miracle, Zeshi said. I am required to make a case against miracles that don't send us invoices. Naruto shrugged. Easy. I'm not good with paperwork. Zeshi's mouth moved in what might have been almost a smile in a different world. Prove your permission, she said, and slid the halberd off her back with a sound like a bell thinking. Without using anyone else's body to live through. Naruto flexed his fingers inside the bracers. They hummed, as if the floor had been convinced to be his ally by a dwarf who didn't believe in allies that couldn't carry their weight. He didn't make a speech. He didn't bow. He didn't reach for Rasengan because he felt, as cleanly as he'd felt the train tied in the earth, that the name of it was being watched with hungry eyes somewhere above them. He stepped forward, one foot, then the other, and the fight looked back at him with interest. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Anvils in the Dark. Heat moved like a living thing, shouldering through the dwarven vault until it found skin to bully and lungs to dare. Naruto's new bracers hummed against his forearms, runes waking and settling as if they were testing his pulse for honesty. Across the open floor, Zeshi let the halberd roll from her palm. The blade caught forge light and turned it thin and white. "Prove your permission," she said again, soft enough that the words had to cross to him on their own merit. Naruto rolled his shoulders once. "I'll show you what I can do without using anyone else as a shield," he said. "And I'll try not to break your toy." Something like amusement moved at the corner of her mouth and was gone. The world tightened around the line between them. The first step killed distance. She came in with the kind of economy you only find in old predators and young masters. No flourish, no threat display. Simply a cut that would have parted a lesser man from his future. Naruto met it with empty hands because that was the challenge, because he had said he would, because promises, even dumb ones, were how he kept himself from becoming the sort of creature he fought. Steel whispered against etched metal. The bracers taking the halberd's kiss sent a cool shock along his bones, a clean line back into the floor. Naruto shifted hips, gave ground, returned it, took the haft on the meat of his palm and shoved. The blade skated, flashed, bit sparks off the anvil pillar behind him. They were quiet. Sometimes fights are concerts. This one was a metronome turning into a heart. Zeshi's feet were bare on the dwarf-cut stone and she never seemed to push. She just was where the killing angles were. Naruto didn't try to outspeed her. He'd learned there were ways to be faster without moving at all. Choose the right moment and let the world do some of the traveling. She feinted a low sweep that wanted his ankle. He pretended to buy it and then planted, heel down, bracers out, and accepted the sweep on the banded metal, the etchwork drinking the force, skin singing. He rolled rebound into a shove that put her heel an inch off the floor. She smiled with her eyes. He grinned outright. "Lazy," she murmured. "Efficient," he said. Around the edges, life kept trying to happen. Tess shouted measurements through a clenched jaw. "Hold that plate there. No, there, you empty-headed nephew of a hinge," while her apprentices skittered like iron gnats, ferrying rivets and quenching tongs. Arya paced the rear wall, palm leaving pale diagrams that sank into stone and breathed, each one a door that would only open the wrong way for the wrong person. Rin stood with her back to a pillar, knives low, weight forward, reading the room for the moment when reading would be over. Selvi watched with her hands in her sleeves because if she showed them she might wring them, and she wouldn't give Zeshi that. The halberd swept, turned, came in as a spear. Naruto tilted, slid an elbow inside the shaft, pinned, released. The hum in the bracers steadied, stabilizers settling into his rhythm, teaching him when to let chakra ride and when to set it down like a hot pan. He tried something small, chakra along his palm, a blunt force push, and felt the world accept the polite version of a te. Chanique it would have rejected if he'd come in loud. Zeshi's eyes flicked to the bracers. "Foreign art. Local engineer," he said, and Tess snorted without looking up, which counted as applause. Zeshi's next cut was an essay. It asked if he would dodge and leave the dwarf child peering over the smelting pit's lip in the path of the blade. It asked if he was the sort of man who would take a 1D for a stranger without needing to be told. It asked, without asking, who mattered. Naruto didn't think. He took the brunt of it on the bracers, let the edge slide, pivoted and shouldered the kid into Rin's arms. Then stepped into Zeshi's reach and crowded the halberd's comfort zone. She let him, because she wanted to know if mercy made him slow. It didn't. It made him committed. He hooked the haft under his forearm, stepped through, and made space for her to backflip out of, because he wasn't going to pin her in a corridor where the dwarves couldn't work around them, then followed with a palm strike that didn't aim for ribs but for the air on her left, her blind angle. She moved anyway. She didn't have a blind. "Mercy is inefficient," she said conversationally, circling, breath unhurried. It's expensive, Naruto said, matching her step, and it buys tomorrows. Tomorrows for whom? For the ones who can't pay today. He didn't add including me. He kept that part. She came again, faster. The halberd hunted his centerline. He let it find the bracers and not flesh, a hair's breadth 12 times in 2 heartbeats. His elbows would blossom into tomorrow's colors. He was alive right now. He'd deal with tomorrow when the bill arrived. He let chakra roll under his skin and not out, kept Rasengan in the cupboard because the name of it thrummed in the air like a plucked string. Watched, measured, wanted. A rivet screamed as the heat took it wrong. A dwarf cursed the steel in the ancient way that is both sacrament and insult. Zeshi's head ticked a fraction, eyes taking in the whole world without leaving Naruto. She wasn't here to slaughter indiscriminately. She was here to beat a line from one point to another and cut the line. Truce. A voice bellowed behind them, its confidence bought wholesale. By order of the Holy Council, the slain theocracy offers terms. Rin didn't look away from the kid she'd tucked behind a cart. Oh, good, she muttered. A man with paper. The envoy had a white glove and rings that had never been paid for by labor. He held a sealed scroll like it could absolve him of the air he shared with other people. Selvi flinched like a habit she hated. Arya took one look and sighed as if she had been hoping to have a day without theater. Zeshi didn't lower her weapon. The envoy tried to continue anyway because men like him are paid to believe words over weather. Surrender the anomaly, he cried. Deliver the heretic singer. The choir will intercede to spare your. Naruto slipped Zeshi's cut, let it hiss past his ear, and said without turning, no. The single syllable made the envoy step back by accident, which told Naruto everything he needed to know about the man's relationship with courage. The bracers throbbed once as he parried and drove forward, moving the fight away from the envoy and toward the empty floor where only their choices could be responsible for blood. You decline terms, the envoy managed, voice wobbling toward outrage. We, your people, her name is Selvi, Naruto said, heat under the politeness, and, he caught the halberd hook, twisted. I'm not a bargain chip. Zeshi's eyes narrowed a mile's worth of calculation. You refuse to be currency. Good, money spends. The envoy fumed, flustered into silence by the fact that his argument had not been invited to the fight. Rin looked like she was collecting interest on her patience. Tess slammed a hammer down and glared at the envoy so hard his rings probably tarnished. Get the drift out of the way, she told him. You're in my shop. The halberd bit stone. Naruto used the shock to step in and catch the haft with his bracer, then slid along it, hand cupping, wrist turning, a trick born in brawls and refined in good company. The move asked her to drop the weapon or be put at a bad angle. She let herself be put at a bad angle so she could see what he did next. He did nothing greedy. He did something respectful. Yield, Zeshi said, a test dressed up as an offer. Pass, Naruto said, simple as bread. She punished him for it. An elbow tasted his jaw. Stars. He smiled around them like they were necessary. He stepped back, shook his head once, ND. Then the fight changed because the dwarves had gotten used to the way the rhythm punctuated their work, because Tess lifted something glowing and new off the anvil with heavy tongs and thrust it toward him. Seal, she barked. Left bracer. Naruto slapped the hot tag to the recessed slot. It hissed. Runes bit deeper. The world snapped into focus like a window newly cleaned. Chakra poured and did not leak. He rolled a sphere into his palm on accident, tiny, half-made, and shut it down with a startled laugh. Even thinking the shape invited it now. The bracers stabilized, not magnified. Friendly gravity. He looked up and Zeshi's eyes had changed a fraction because she saw it land in him, the way you see rain decide to fall. Again, she said. They went again. Faster, but not sloppier. He stopped trying to win and started trying to be right, which isn't the same and often gets you killed. He took a scrape to the ribs that would ask to be a scar someday. He let 3 opportunities to bring the halberd into the path of a dwarf pass because opportunities and traps share a spine. He made space, and when a Quagga pack finally hit the side passage, shaggy armor and wet teeth encouraged bow. Rode from hunger. He left the duel for 2 heartbeats to intercept them, because sometimes even the most elegant fight has to be interrupted by necessity. Zeshi didn't strike him in the back. She tched what he did to the first Quagga, gentle by the standards of war, cruel by the standards of mercy, and how he drove the rest back with a wind-fed shove that didn't flatten the dwarf apprentice who been in the way because Naruto chose the angle that cost him balance instead. He gave up position for people. By the time he returned to the diameter of their dance, he'd lost the advantage. Zeshi had taken it and tucked it away like a coin for later. He tasted blood. You're going to lose, she observed with no pleasure. Maybe, he said, but I'm not going to lose anyone else on the way. She blinked and, for a breath, looked at him as if he'd said something inconveniently beautiful. The envoy made the poor choice to find his courage at last. He strode between them with a lifted hand and a sanctified tone, presenting the scroll as if paper could divide force. In the name of, Zeshi's halberd grazed the parchment. It fell in 2 disappointed pieces. I was speaking, she said, without malice. The envoy went wax pale. Selvi's lips parted, then closed. She put her hands back inside her sleeves to keep from trembling somewhere visible. Zeshi leveled the blade at Naruto's chest. I will return, she said, as if talking to herself. When the dwarves are not hostages to your conscience. Take your time, Naruto said, and meant it. And the choir? Rin asked out loud, because someone had to. Because men with rings always need prodding to remember the rest of the list. Zeshi glanced at Selvi. Your bridge burning buys you an hour, canter. It was a hymn, Selvi said. Not a bridge. Zeshi nodded as if the distinction mattered. Maybe it did. She turned without performative cape flare and walked away. The halberd went back to her back in one tidy motion. The envoy scuttled after her, clutching the halves of his scroll like he could paste pride back together later. The hall exhaled. It didn't relax. Relief in a place like this is a luxury nobody trusts. Tess slapped Naruto's shoulder with a hand that had been in a forge. You trade blows like a smart man for once, she said. Hold still. She tweaked a rune line, clicked her tongue, and then, wholly without warning, threw one of the bracers into a trough. Fished it out, and hammered it twice more. Naruto yelped when she put it back on. She ignored him and tightened the leather straps. There. Now if you insist on headbutting miracles, you won't drop your hand at the wrong moment. I don't insist, Naruto said, and then smiled at the way Rin and Arya were both watching him like auditors who'd found an asset where they'd expected a liability. Arya rolled her neck. Congratulations, she told Tess. You've successfully convinced the floor to love him. The floor has taste, Tess said. Selvi approached with a small cloth and a mouth that didn't know what expression to wear. Your jaw, she said. May I, please, Naruto said, obeying the world's simplest orders. She wiped away the blood with a tenderness that wasn't soft so much as precise. He recognized the difference. It made thanks unnecessary and therefore truer. Terms, Rin said, focused returning like a knife being remembered. The theocracy will be back with a new script. We can't keep playing defense and call it strategy. Agreed, Arya said, crisp. They'll try to cut the dwarves off from their own galleries. They'll bait with a miracle that looks like safety. If we give them a corridor, they'll bless their boots and walk in. Tess snorted. Then we close the corridor on their boots, she said. The lower hinge choke can be called APSED if someone with hands like his and stupidity like mine drags the reinforcement pins and sets a sympathetic crack. Define sympathetic, Rin said. Crack that likes other cracks, Tess said. Yo, you ever snap a bad plate and it decides to take the whole run with it? Love that for us, Rin said. What do you need? 2 rune charges, the size of a good apology, Tess said. Someone to CARRY them and not drop them when the wall hisses. 3 dwarves who were born ornery. I have one song that will hold a ceiling's breath for a count of 6, Selvi offered, surprised at herself as she said it. If it's a living ceiling. Some of them are. They all are, Tess said. You've just been building churches that forget it. They made a plan as if the plan had always been in the room waiting to be heard. Naruto would carry one charge and plant it in the pinning seam that ran like a spine across the choke. A dwarf named Broad would plant the second because he'd lost 2 cousins and had nothing better to do than get even with physics. Rin would run point on the evac through the side tunnels, her knives for cutting rope and certainty, not throats. Arya would lay sigils that drank any hymn that tried to uncollapse their collapse. Selvi would stand with her palms on stone and hum the ceiling awake just long enough for Naruto to get clear. Tess would curse in Dwarven, which sounded like the forge saying I told you so. They moved. The lower hinge corridor greeted them with old dust and the wet breath of stone that had been promised peace by men now dead. The choke narrowed to a seam where dwarves had once sung the rock smooth, then changed their mind and left it bare, a place where you could hear water far beneath as if it were gossip from another century. Here, Tess said, pointing with her chin. Plant it where the seam meets the married vein. Don't ask why we call it that unless you want to spend an hour losing respect for the poetic impulses of miners. Later, Naruto said, already moving. The bracers vibrated at a frequency his bones agreed with. The rune charge pulsed against his palm like a patient heartbeat. Footsteps scraped in the far dark. The choir had not waited long to invent themselves a second chance. A censer scent lifted, thin as old paper burning. Arya hissed through teeth. Go, Rin said. We'll delay. Naruto slid along the seam, fingers feeling for the place the rock wanted to crack. He'd broken 1,000 things in a lifetime spent keeping the important ones whole. He knew the kindness of letting a structure fail where it wouldn't kill children. He set the charge. It settled with a pleased click, light worming into the seam, finding hairlines to love. Broad, Tess barked. The dwarf shouldered in, set his charge with the careful brutality of a man who writes neat letters. Selvi pressed both palms to the stone and began a note so low it felt like a hand around a heartbeat. The ceiling listened. It stilled. The first zealot round. Dead the curve too fast and had to pinwheel his arms to keep balance. Rin tripped him into the wall without making it look like an art form. Arya whipped a plate. The air sketched a symbol that chewed the hymn down to breath. Now, Tess said. Naruto yanked the pin wedge. Broad did the same. The seam shivered. Once, twice, then committed. Rock is slow until it isn't. The ceiling dropped the distance between an idea and an event. Rin dragged Selvi back. Naruto pulled Broad by the collar with one hand and threw himself backward with the other, shoulder screaming. For a second the world was sound and dust and a darkness with teeth. Then air moved, found new paths, learned new names for where it was allowed to go. The choke sealed with a growl. Silence hit like a blessing and then like the absent that follows loud prayer when you realize the room has stopped listening to the man with the book. Arya coughed gray and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. They'll dig, she said. But not fast. And not today. They'll pray at it, Rin said. And discover the ceiling is an atheist. Tess leaned her forehead against the wall and whispered 3 promises to ancestors you didn't have to believe in for them to do good. Then she cuffed Naruto's shoulder and pretended she had never said the promises out loud. You did well, she said, as if she were admitting a debt. You didn't try to be clever when the stone asked you to be honest. I like honest, Naruto said. He meant it more now than he had yesterday. Back in the main vault, the air tasted different, fear diluted, hope allowed. The dwarves were still working because stopping is when you start thinking, and thinking is a luxury mid-siege. The envoy was gone, having decided to carry his rings somewhere with fewer decisions. Zeshi had vanished with him. A clean absence. Rin drew on the floor with chalk she'd stolen from a child, mapping exits and gossip. They'll regroup, she said. They'll hire men who don't pray loudly and count better. Then we take the fight outside the vaults, where their hymns have no walls to bounce off, Arya said. Selvi's mouth made a shape around a word she'd never gotten to use this way. We could take the witness. She blushed at her own arrogance and clarified. I mean, the choir mistress who pushed the ford. She has sway among the moderate priests. If I can show her, if I can make her hear without obedience. You'd walk back in, Rin said, half question, half warning. I'd walk toward, Selvi said. Not back, and not alone. Not alone, Naruto agreed, immediately, like that was the simplest promise on the table. But not tonight. Tonight we breathe. They breathed. They ate food that had been an afterthought to hunger. Dwarves told the kind of jokes that only make sense under a mountain. And Naruto laughed because jokes are the stitches in a day like this. Tess sat and fell asleep mid-sentence, jaw slack, a hammer still near her hand in case anyone thought to argue with sleep. Arya inked sigils that would last 2 days longer than she said they would because she had done the math twice. Rin wrote a letter to no one and burned it over a blue flame, watching the SMO. K as if it could carry an idea to a person who needed it. Selvi went to the edge of the vault and sang no louder than a mother hums to a child who's not hers and needs a dream anyway. Naruto climbed the service stairs to the top of a vent shaft to feel air that had not been reheated a dozen times. He stepped into a gallery where the rock gave way to a slice of night. Stars hung like coins someone had put on a table and forgotten. The ridge above was a darker line against dark. The hair on his arms lifted. He wasn't alone. The air hissed faintly, and a shape lowered with the lightlessness of a shadow deciding to behave like a body. It was not human in the way a statue is not human. Silver-chased armor had been poured into the outline of a knight and then convinced to move with patience. A crystal eye in its gauntlet drank starlight in, held it, measured it. Naruto didn't reach for a weapon. He had 2 good hands and a jacket full of poor jokes. He went with the hands. Evening, he said. Measurement concluded. The figure said, voice like a cold room. Not hostile, not warm. An observation that had Overlord caution. Threat assessment. Significant. Casualty projection. High, if misapplied. Do you talk this way to everyone? Naruto asked mildly, or just the ones you think might break your plans by accident? The helm tilted. In the gesture was a ghost of surprise, as if the person inside the armor, or the mind bound to it, had not expected to be addressed like a neighbor at a window. You saved noncombatants during a duel, the voice said. You refused terms that would simplify variables. You chose to collapse a corridor at cost to your own position. These actions suggest you are predictably inefficient. Sorry, Naruto said, and didn't sound sorry at all. Predictable inefficiency, the figure said, is occasionally a workable constant. The gauntlet opened. For a breath, the crystal eye reflected him. A tired, grinning man in a jacket someone had bled on, bracers humming like polite bees. Naruto tilted his head. You going to tell me your name? The Platinum One's proxy will suffice. The Platinum One, Naruto repeated. Guy with a lot of opinions about the future. Correct. The proxy paused. The future is fragile. So are people, Naruto said. We build it anyway. Silence. Then, the hollow seraph collects belief. She will not be delayed by collapsed corridors for long. You cannot defeat her by being where she expects you to be. I wasn't planning to, Naruto said. I was planning to be where I'm needed. The helm inclined. In that case, the proxy said, voice a fraction softer. Consider this a courtesy. North of the temple city, a choir rehearses a purge. It is scheduled within 7 days. If you intend to alter it, do not do it alone. Naruto exhaled, a laugh without humor or its absence. I'm not very good at alone. Good, the proxy said, and lifted into the air with controlled disdain for gravity. The starlight in the crystal eye dimmed. You are being watched by more than one set of eyes, Uzumaki Naruto. Then make sure at least one of them is watching for the right reasons, Naruto called back. The figure paused long enough to be called a decision. Measurement noted, it said. Then it was gone, a subtraction so clean the knight looked more honest afterward. Naruto stood with the bracers warm on his skin and the woe. RLD doing that thing it did when it decided to let him be tired. Below, the dwarven vault breathed. Somewhere in the dark, Zeshi was sharpening a blade she had never dulled. In a city 2 days' walk away, men with rings were writing letters about consequences. North of a temple city, a woman with stolen light was counting beliefs like coin. He took the stairs back down. Rin was waiting where the shadow met the glow, arms folded. Expression complicated. Well, she asked. Silver friend says we're predictably inefficient, Naruto said. Rin thought about that and smiled because she liked being impossible to invest in on paper. Good, she said. Let's be the right kind of inefficient. He bumped her shoulder as they fell into step. We leave at first light, he said. First light, she agreed. Try not to duel the ceiling in your sleep. No promises, he said, but the laugh in it made it almost true. He lay down near the warm belly of the forge with his jacket under his head. The brace, RS hummed in time with the city he couldn't hear and the mountain he could. Selvi's song braided into the clangs. Arya's sigils guttered and steadied like thoughtful stars. Tess snored like a content dragon. Naruto slept, and in his sleep a tide moved through him that had nothing to do with oceans. It was the slow breathing of a world deciding whether it could trust him. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Names the light cannot steal. The road to the temple city wound through fields where the wheat had learned to bow to the wind just enough to avoid being noticed by men with taxes. Pilgrims walked in strings of gray and white, their feet making that soft steady sound of faith going somewhere important. No one paid attention to a farmer's cart with a lazy horse and a driver with a mouth like a ledger. No one ever did. That was why Rin had rented it. Act rustic, she murmured. Naruto took off his jacket and draped it over a sack of turnips that had never done anything wrong. Howdy, he said. Rin's mouth twitched. You're a menace, she said. Selvi. Selvi smoothed her hair into a practical coil, tucked her hands into her sleeves, and became the sort of plane a guard's eye slides off. A woman. You'd see at a threshold and forget by the second step. Arya sat with her legs crossed on the cart's backboard, a plate of etched brass balanced on her knee, tapping a sequence she swore would read a simple warmth charm unless you knew what warmth meant to a lock. Tess rode beside the horse, which had decided to like her because she spoke in a voice that valued labor. She had a cloth-wrapped bundle on her hip that clinked if you listened close, dust ground from a mineral vein that loves to eat the edges off spells. She patted the horse as if it could keep a secret. The horse decided it could. The city rose in layers. First the smoke. Not dirty, not clean, a civic smell. Then the walls, white in the morning light like a confession that wanted you to think it was innocent. Then the sound. Bells that believed in themselves. The murmur of a crowd that wanted to be lifted, a choir rehearsing humility. Friendly, Naruto said, and the word came out like a question. Friendly the way fire is friendly when you're cold. Rin said. Don't touch it because it smiles. They passed through the outer gate with a nod from a guard who had learned to be respectful of carts because carts became markets and markets paid wages. Selvi's eyes moved fast, counting priests by the cut of their robes, marking which choir houses had open doors, which had watchers. She had avoided looking at this place as a home for a long time. Now she let herself see it as a layout. Choir of radiant measure, she said, tilting her head toward a long building with shutters that made you feel judged. Choir of vigilant harmonies. The Basilica of the White Name is in the center. The rehearsal square will be 2 streets over from the western bell tower. Where's our back door? Rin asked. Selvi pointed to a row of vents that breathed out heat like sighs. The kitchens. There's a dumbwaiter shaft the size of a man with flexible bones. Guess who has flexible bones? Rin said, and didn't wait for Naruto to preen. Arya. I'll lace the outer doors, Arya said. Not to keep out an army. To make hymns forget the word for open. The sigils will look like ornamental flourishes if you don't squint too hard. If you squint too hard, you'll be the kind of person who deserves what happens to you. Tess. Rin asked. Tess patted the dust bag. Vents, she said, seating. It'll settle like a grumpy snow that hates religion. And me, Naruto said. Rin flicked him a look. You play decoy with a smile, she said. You're good at it. Try not to juggle knives unless someone tips. He slumped. I can juggle. You can, Rin said. And we will put that on the list of talents we exploit later, after not dying. They took rooms at a boarding house 3 streets off the market where the landlady collected rent and roomers with equal competence. Rin smiled at her in that way that made people simultaneously trust her and count their teaspoons after. The woman waved them to the back courtyard with a warning. About laundry lines and a promise not to ask questions if their laundry looked like a siege. Rin slid coin across the counter that meant she had purchased the right to come and go. It had a way of making guards forget faces. They split. Arya drifted along the basilica's flank as if she had lost an earring and was being too proud to admit it, palming sigils onto stone in tiny flourishes that would have looked like ivy if ivy were a mathematician. Tess set a cough into the vents that would make relics sneeze. Selvi ducked into the outer choir houses with a face that said she had errands and ALS. O regrets and exchanged hymn scrolls in 2 places, putting copies where originals had been and originals where eyes would accidentally see them and think they had been there all along. Rin vanished. ND reappeared with a baker's mark burned into her palm and a sack of hard rolls that tasted like they'd been baked by a man who hated moisture. Naruto played a man with time on his hands. He watched street corners, counted watchers, learned which bells tolled for practice and which tolled for order. By afternoon, the city had that bustle that comes when people have remembered a big day as soon and want to feel ahead of it for once. Street vendors had found new prices for old things. Children practiced kneeling because their parents said it would be important to do it right. Priests went briskle, why with their mouths set to the shape of yes. Selvi, Naruto said when they met in a narrow side lane where laundry hung like common flags, how does this work? Their purge. Selvi held a roll she had not eaten and probably would not. She looked toward the basilica where the great doors stood shut like teeth. They opened the white name, she said. Not the name itself. The idea of it. They said it a platform built of belief and direct it at an object they have labeled, impure. A person, a policy, a city district. The name doesn't burn, exactly. It removes. Removes what? Naruto asked. Claim, she said. If the name succeeds, people forget that what was touched has a right to exist. Naruto blew out air in a low, unhappy sound. I hate that. I know, she said. The soft twist of her oath was affection and apology and also not apologizing for knowing him. Can you bend it? He asked. Her eyes went distant for a breath, counting notes and listening to breaths that were not here. Not head on, she said. But I can change the intervals so the name does not find an object. It is a petty trick. It buys moments. Moments, said Rin from behind a hanging sheet, a mild scream, What keep us alive while better people invent miracles? They sat on an overturned crate and passed the hard roll between them. Naruto watched people go about their day and thought about how good people are at walking past altars if the altar isn't in the middle of the road. Rin's right, he said. Moments. She nodded. Her mouth tried on a smile and kept it for a line or two. If I fail, you will improvise, she said. Not a question. A faith that did not ask permission. If you fail, I will improvise and also we will go home and sleep and then send very rude letters, he said. Deal, Selvi said, and tucked her hands back into her sleeves. The rehearsal square was a flight of stairs above the city's pulse, paved in pale stone that reflected the sky and made everything brighter than it needed to be. A platform stood at the far end under a canopy of white cloth and gold thread. A dozen priests in tidy lines practiced moving as one. 100 singers worked their mouths silently, getting the shapes right so later the sound would arrive where it belonged. Naruto climbed the stairs with a confidence that was mostly borrowed and partly stubbornness. Rin walked beside him, the kind of Oman who could be invisible until you needed something and then you discovered she had been there all along. Tess came behind with a wrapped bundle and the look in her eye that says if you hurt my friends I will turn you into a lesson. Arya was off to the left under a carved arch where people paid more attention to the carvings than to a woman tapping a plate with her fingernail. Selvi went ahead, because that was the plan. She belonged in the air where the words would happen. A priest with more certainty than face stepped into Naruto's path. This square is closed, he said. Then you should put a door on the bottom of the stairs. Naruto said, genial, as if offering helpful feedback. Your levity is ill-timed, the priest said. He had a voice designed to carry bad news. An important rehearsal is in progress. Rin slid half a step forward, smiled without teeth. We have a delivery for the kitchens, she said. Ask anyone with an apron and an exhaustion complex. We'll be out of your way before your next righteous thought. The priest made a move like he wanted to bar their path and then realized he was outnumbered and out of jurisdiction. He sniffed and stepped aside. Stay to the edges, he said, and do not cross the beams, eat the props, stand in the good light, Rin said, counting them off. Yes, we are professionals. Naruto caught Selvi's eye across the square. She gave him one small nod. He nodded back and then let his posture shift into casual and visible and unthreatening. Nothing disarms a watcher like a man who looks like he doesn't want anything important. The first line of the rehearsal lifted. No one sang out loud. Syllables shaped the air. It was like watching a bow drawn back without the arrow leaving the string. Selvi moved into the second row, taking her old place. Body remembering how to stand in obedience and deliberately refusing. Rin murmured, ready. Arya's plates hummed, quiet, tucked into the stone like secrets. Tess took a handful of dust and blew it into a vent. It fell and didn't. Naruto let his hands hang open and felt the square, the way stone carries sound when you ask it to. The canopy shivered with belief and then steadied. The platform's edge glowed faintly like paper against the sun. Then the air changed. Naruto felt it first in his mouth, the way your tongue tastes a storm. Selvi went still. Arya swore, quietly, because she knew the feel of a source bringing itself to a destination. Rin tightened her hand on Naruto's sleeve in a gesture that managed to say both don't and do. The woman who walked out from behind the canopy did not look like a monster. That would have been lazy. She looked like a miracle someone had not paid enough for. Her hair was the color of old gold, not the wealth kind, the kind candles make when they're tired. Her eyes were gray like dawn deciding whether to try again. She wore the white of the basilica and over it a thin mantle cut from light that had been taught to look like cloth. When she breathed, the canopy lines shifted to make room for her breath. Selvi spoke without turning her head. Vera, she said, the hollow seraph. Vera didn't look at Naruto. She didn't have to, yet. She looked at the square, at the choir, at the platform that had been made to lift the white name high enough for people to see themselves reflected in it. She reached out a hand. Belief gathered at her fingers like friendly moths. Naruto took a breath and felt Rasengan form in his palm with the ease of an old trick, and in the same breath it failed. Not fizzled, not blew back. It just refused, like the syllable had been plucked out of his throat and set aside. He blinked. He laughed once, because it's what you do when a friend stands you up, and closed his hand. The bracers hummed as if to say you're not alone, genius. He rolled his shoulders and changed plans. Rin's eyes flicked to him. He shook his head minutely. Her mouth flattened and then unflattened because she trusted him even when she wanted to swear. Vera stepped onto the platform and the crowd that was not a crowd because it was a rehearsal still leaned forward. The priests moved in tidy lines to make a shape behind her. And the shape was a funnel pointed at the city. Do not interrupt, Arya hissed under her breath. If you interrupt when the name is half open it will search for whatever made it stumble and latch. So we let it open? Naruto asked. We redirect, Selvi said, and for the first time her voice had that canter snap in it, the one that makes 100 throats obey so they don't lose their place. Rin, you're right, Arya, left, Tess, the vent, Naruto, be obvious. He smiled and walked across the rehearsal square as if he had a right to walk anywhere. Priests looked up. Narrowed eyes. Two moved to intercept. He drifted away from them like water deciding to be a different river and stood in a place where 100 onlookers could see him if they were looking for the wrong thing. It would be useful if you tripped. Rin muttered inside his ear. He stumbled on a crack and recovered with a grin that said I meant to. Selvi lifted her chin and sang. It wasn't loud. It was precise. She set her line under Vera's hand. Just enough to tilt the funnel without snapping it. The white name began to open. Naruto felt it with the same part of himself that knew when a child was about to fall. Vera's mantle flared, thin light around her shoulders. She turned her head a fraction. Her eyes found Selvi, then passed over her like she'd been weighed and set aside without disdain, just assumption. Naruto coughed. The joke of it made several priests look at him. Rin clapped once, too polite by a hair, which made people stare harder. Arya ran her thumb along the edge of a plate and the sigil on the left doorframe yawned with appetite. Tess blew dust into a vent and watched the glitter fall like snow that wanted to be ash. Vera finally looked at him. When she did, belief gusted. It wanted to run toward whatever her gaze ran toward. Naruto felt the weight of it like a push at his chest that didn't bruise, just asked if he minded being moved. He minded. He stayed. You are not of this system, Vera said. Her voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was clean the way water is until someone tells it to carry a rumor. You are an inefficiency. Predictably, Naruto said. She blinked like tea. The cadence of the word amused her in principle. I have learned your name, she said. Everybody does, he said, because he refused to dignify it and because he knew she didn't mean the little one you write on the inside of your shirts. She extended her hand. The canopy trembled like a veil in a breeze. Belief gathered at her palm again. It reached for him, then for the bruise of a word inside him. For the technique he always reached for when fists and words ran out. Naruto felt it. Felt the nudge, the concept being lifted up like a kid who had fallen asleep on a couch and carried to bed. Vera took the name of his favorite miracle and set it on her tongue. Hey, he said softly. Give that back. It is safer with me, Vera replied, honest. You do not understand this world. Your kindness will get people erased. She turned her hand. The white name opened like a flower in a book. Selvi's counterline tilted it. Rin's clapping made the square remember it had its own rhythm. Arya's sigil drank at the hinges of the doors so no one could flee to the safety of tradition mid-song. Tessa's dust lay fine as frost on everything the name touched and made slick what wanted friction. Vera pointed the name toward Naruto. Don't take the bait, Arya said under her breath, small and fierce. It is a rehearsal. She is not allowed to erase yet. She is measuring what she can make the heir consent to. Naruto nodded as if to himself and walked toward the platform instead of away. He didn't run. He didn't set himself like an ox. He walked like a man going to meet a neighbor who had come to earn a tool and scold him for using it wrong. Do not, a priest hissed, and moved to bar his path with a liturgical gesture meant to be elegant and became clumsy when panic got in his elbow. Naruto sidestepped, touched the man's wrist to make him feel seen, and kept walking. Selvi's line wavered, then held. Vera's hand traced a clean arc. The white name sought. Naruto did not present himself as an object. He presented himself as a collection of small decisions. He thought about lending a cloak to a cold girl in a different life, about a boy who had taken his hand under a desk, about a dozen times he had stayed even when it made him late to his own suffering. He filled the space around him with choices and watched the name try to decide which one to remove. It faltered. It wanted a single head to strike. He refused to be simple. Rin stepped into the chap's line of sight and made a face that would have been dignified if it weren't so stupid. He laughed without meaning to, which split his attention away from fear. Arya threw a plate. It rolled under the platform and kissed a support strut. Tess tossed her dust in a long shimmering curve under the canopy. Belief got grit in its teeth and paused to chew. Vera pressed. Naruto reached for Rasengan again, because habit is maddening, and again it wasn't there. His palm felt like a mouth that had forgotten the word. For a heartbeat, anger sparked at his heel. He let it go. He did not need one trick. He needed any trick. He ran instead. Not away. Up. He put a foot on the edge of a column and went 2 steps higher than a sane man. Isekai'd who grabbed for his ankle caught air and the echo of a grin. Naruto slapped the canopy support and felt how belief made it hum. He slapped again and stole that hum the way kids steal apples, careless and precise. The canopy dipped. Light made of rules tried to stay taut and ended up agreeing to be fabric instead. Selvi changed her line. She anchored the tilt, a gentle brace at the shoulder of a god. The white name pivoted a fraction. It pointed at a statue of a previous high cantor, a man whose stone mouth had been carved to look generous and had accidentally looked smug. Arya hissed in a breath that meant, "Don't you dare." Tess said, "Oops," very loud, which in Dwarven counts as theology. Vera forced the arc back with a flick that was almost impatient. For the first time she looked at Selvi like she saw her and not just her position in a harmony. "You," Vera said. "Me," Selvi said, and if her voice shook it shook like a plucked string, vibrating at the precise frequency she wanted. "Please do not point the name at people. It isn't made for that. It is made to clean," Vera said, gently. "Cleanliness is not holiness," Selvi said, and Naruto, who had not grown up in a church, recognized the kind of bravery that uses small words like knives. Rin, who had grown up without a church but with a ledger full of debts, rocked on her heels like she was watching someone pick a lock with hymnals and was delighted. Vera's eyes softened a fraction. It was not mercy. It was surprise trying on an interest. "You left," she said to Selvi. "I arrived," Selvi said. A crack rolled out the platform supports. Tessa's dust finding a new friend. The belief-laced canopy wobbled. The white name opened a hand and forgot what it had reached for. Vera tilted her hand again. It was a SM. All motion that felt like a mountain choosing a different address. The rehearsal lines responded with drilled grace. The platform found its posture. Naruto dropped from the column and hit the paving his knees just bent enough that his spine didn't hate him. A guard lunged. Without Rasengan, his hands remembered older languages. He caught the man's arm, redirected, put him down on his back where he could count clouds, and whispered. Stay. The guard stayed. People do, sometimes, when you ask like you mean it. Vera traced a circle in the air with 2 fingers, and Naruto felt the name of Shadow Clones twitch. Not the technique itself. He could still make one, barely, edges fuzzy, but the word of it pulled like a thread. She was robbing nouns. She was making the world forget what to call help. Enough, Vera said, not annoyed, not pleased, simply invoking closure. If I must remove one thing today, it will be the object that makes the rest possible. Her eyes found Naruto. He felt the target condense and understood. She had marked Rasengan as the pivot and set it aside and would come for Naruto if the trick failed. She would always reach for the thing that carried the choice. He stepped forward, because if she wanted the centerpiece he would give her all the other pieces and see if her attention could juggle. Do you erase names, he asked, or do you erase people's right to say them? Vera's gaze didn't waver. The name removes the claim that a false miracle has on the world. What if the miracle is people, he said, being brave at the same time without rehearsing. A dozen heads turned because the sentence rang like a bell even if you hated it. Selvi's mouth opened. She shut it and smiled enough for 2 people. Rin made a small noise that meant you ridiculous man. And also meant I will stand with you until my shoes wear out. Arya rolled her eyes and wrote a sigil on the inside of her wrist to keep from clapping. Tess sniffed hard and muttered about dust. Vera looked almost sad. You are charming, she said. You will kill so many. Not if I can help it, he said simply. Anomalies don't get to choose, she said. Then call me ordinary, he said. She tilted her head. Very well, she said. And dropped her hand. The rehearsal ended the way a fight stops when someone puts the tablecloth back on the table. Sound folded. The lines broke. Priests who had been pretending not to stare remembered their dignity and moved it to safer places. Vera stepped off the platform and the canopy sagged for a breath, then snapped back to being a symbol. People started to breathe again and discovered they had forgotten how. Rin sucked spit off her back molars and flicked her eyes at Naruto. Move, she said without saying it. They moved. The square filled with the saintel of robes and the encroaching weight of consequence. They made it 3 streets before the first wall of uniforms formed at the end of an alley. The uniforms weren't for show. The men inside them had decided not to care about applause. Rin put her hands up, palms empty. Arya tucked her plates away because sometimes steel makes people stupid. Tess shifted her weight like someone who has never needed permission to lift anything heavy. Selvi took her place at Naruto's shoulder and squared a set of bones you wouldn't have described as brave if you hadn't seen them spend themselves. Blasphemers, a man said. He had a righteous nose and a tired mouth, a combination that often ends in bad policy. Under the authority of Run, Naruto asked. Rin nodded once. Right, she said. Left, Arya said, already moving left. Down, Tess said, kicking a grate. They went down. It wasn't elegant. It never is. The grate protested. The alley shouted the existence of their plan to anyone with ears. The world became a tube with opinions. They splashed into knee-deep runoff that had the decency to be mostly water and the indecency to be not entirely. Rin's curse was practical and bilingual. A's sigil flashed on the wall behind them and the corridor forgot the word for follow for 30 seconds. Selvi, Naruto said, because breath plans matter, you okay? Like a hymn sung in a storm, she said. I'm good if the storm is short. Short, he promised. Promise. They cut right, then left, then into a culvert that had been designed by someone who hated maintenance. Tess shouldered a hatch like she'd been waiting to have that argument for years and won it. They emerged into a service corridor behind a bakery where 3 boys were stealing buns with such efficiency Rin felt professionally moved. She threw them a look that said you owe me one later. They nodded with the solemnity of criminals who have recognized a patron saint. They made it back to the boarding house with the order of speed that could be chosen for virtue if anyone was counting. Rin slammed the door and set 3 quiet locks, none of which involved keys. Arya scratched a loop on the inside frame and the room forgot the word for echo. Tess upended her dust bag and seated the rafters, The air smelled like iron deciding to be art. Selvi sat on the stairs and closed her eyes for 2 breaths too long. Naruto crouched in front of her. Hey, he said. You did good. She shook her head. I set the name off center and she corrected with her shoulder. She can do this without the choir. Sure, Naruto said, but it's harder and less pretty and that matters to people who like the show. Rin leaned on the banister, face pale under the dirt, eyes sharp. We're burned, she said. Every petty functionary a crush on a priest will want to turn us in for a pat on the head. Not us, Arya said, flat. Her. She nodded at Selvi, then at Naruto. And him. They will be the branded ones. The city will I jingly call us accessories and sleep better about it. As if on cue, a stone hit the shutters hard enough to make them jump. A child's voice ran down the alley like a rumor that had learned to yell, heretics. Rin thumbed the latch and didn't open it. We go to ground, she asked. We go up, Naruto said. Roof. The roof gave them the city in a moody sprawl. Smoke layered. Bells argued. On the far side, the basilica laid itself out like a man who wanted you to notice his good side. Rin stood with her hands on the parapet and studied the way streets funneled toward the white names square. If they push the purge in 7 days, she said, that rehearsal will have been about optics. They'll want to show the city their miracle works cleanly and with minimal complaint. They'll bring a relic battery and 6 choir leaders with rings you can see across the square, Arya said. And they'll set the name on anything that proves embarrassment as possible. They'll call it cleansing pride. Selvi kept her eyes on her hands. They'll erase a district to make it look like they aren't targeting people, she said. Then they'll erase people inside it and say it was incidental, unfortunate, necessary. Tess scowled. I hate tidy cruelty, she said. It makes bad stories. Messy then, Rin said. We make it messy. How? Naruto asked. By breaking the stage, Rin said. Not the platform. The place in people where they think they can borrow a miracle without paying interest. That's expensive, Arya said. Rin turned to Naruto. You talk too much and people like you for it, she said. For once, that's a feature. He squinted, fond, flattered. Don't be, she said. It's an assignment. A shadow slid over them. It wasn't a cloud. It was too deliberate. Naruto looked up, and caught a gleam like river water poured into the shape of a man. The Argent Knight descended to the parapet with the gentility of a hawk that has learned not to frighten cows. Rin's hand went to a knife, then away. She realized by the way air behaved that fights here would be theater and she hated bad theater. The helm inclined. You were told not to do this alone, the voice said. You were being watched by those who do not share your optimism. Optimism is a bad habit, Rin said. We share it. The helm turned toward Naruto. The hollow seraph will mark you, it said. Not for death, for demonstration. Already happened, Naruto said. She stole a word, and tried for another. The theft will return, the proxy said. Names are elastic, but the lock will remain for a day. Rasengan, Naruto said, casual, as if saying it wouldn't make his hand ache with wanting. That word's in your pocket, huh? The proxy did not answer questions it had not been programmed to. If you intend to alter the purge, it said, you will require witnesses who cannot be erased by narrative. Children, Rin asked, dangerous soft. Cowards, Arya said. Bureaucrats. Merchants with inventories that can't afford miracles. A few priests who like the sound of their own mercy. She sighed. I can fetch 3 of those tomorrow and condescend them into being brave for an afternoon. Tess crossed her arms. I will get dwarves, she said. This is not a dwarf matter, the proxy said. Tess's chin came up so fast it could have cut. Everything that breaks people is a dwarf matter, she said. I'll bring 3 foremen with arms like doors who think sermonizing is for men who don't lift. They won't be erased by a narrative because narratives bounce off calluses. Selvi breathed in and out, counting the beats. I can bring 1 canter. She said. She is kind. She is invisible. People like her because she notices when they hurt. If they try to erase her, the city will discover it likes pain more than holiness. Which is a kind of honesty. Quote. Rin looked at Naruto. And you'll bring a square full of attention and make it look easy long enough for us to stick knives in the right places. He folded his arms over the parapet, and watched the basilica burn gold as the evening got sentimental. "I can do that," he said. The proxy pointed. No flourish, just a small angle of the hand. "There is a lock on the white names platform," it said. "Not on the wood, on the idea of platform. It binds the miracle to the stage. You will need to unseat it." Arya's head tilted, interested despite herself. "How do you unseat a concept?" "By moving people," Selvi said. "If the name needs a stage and we make the city into a stage, it will not find where to stand. It might spill." "Spill on who?" Rin asked. "Becca. Use that was the question decent people asked." Selvi set her jaw. "On us," she said. "If we're doing it right." No one spoke for a minute. This wasn't a noble silence. It was a math one. They did the arithmetic of risk and discovered it was bleak and then chose it anyway because the other numbers were worse. "Okay," Naruto said. "We make a stage big enough to confuse a miracle." He slid down from the parapet and set a clone to run roots. It popped with a hiss that tasted like hunger. He made another, smaller, more polite. It lasted longer. The bracers hummed approval like distant bees. Rin watch. Head him like a woman watching rain think about falling. "You're going to get hurt," she said. "I usually do," he said. He didn't pretend otherwise. It made her mouth soften and her eyes go mean, the combination he liked best. "Good," she said. "I've got practice sewing idiots up." The next 2 days were logistics and audacity. Rin pulled threads and made people who would never have attended the same breakfast occupy the same afternoon. Arya coaxed a shopkeeper into becoming a witness by making him fear for his ledger more than for his soul. She told him the truth about how miracles collect interest. Tess visited a guild hall and banged a mug on a table until 3 dwarves agreed to come and stand and glare for justice because dwarves have never met a glare they didn't think belonged to them. Selvi wrote a letter to the cantor with handwriting that hadn't trembled since childhood and received back a single line, "Yes." Naruto wandered into conversations without being invited and left people grinning and a little braver. He practiced with the bracers until he could make small shapes that almost wanted to be Rasengan and then stop before they hurt him. He learned the timing of the square, ease bells and the way sound carried under the canopy. He learned where a man could stand to be seen by most of the city and still be out of the first volley of shame. On the night before the purge, they stood on the roof again. The basilica glowed like sugar you'd regret in the morning. The streets felt expectant because expectation is a currency and the theocracy had sold a lot of it. "You ever think about not doing this?" Rin asked, voice low. "Not for drama, for honesty." "Sometimes," Naruto said. "Then I think about someone who doesn't get a vote if I don't, and I run out of alternatives." He huffed a laugh that didn't find a home in her throat. "You make impossible feel normal," she said. "You make normal feel possible," he said, and then realized he had said something that had more meanings than he intended. He didn't look away. Neither did she. Selvi coughed, politely, because she is occasionally merciful to scenes. "I need to sleep," she said. "Tomorrow I sing at a god without being impolite." "Try to be a little impolite," Rin said. "I'll bring a spoon and clink the bowl," Selvi said, deadpan. Arya snorted. The proxy did not reappear. The night held. Somewhere in it, Zeshi sharpened her halberd and asked the ceiling a question only she could hear. "What does efficiency buy that mercy cannot?" Morning came dressed as a parade. The square filled with pilgrims who had it was a rehearsal last time and were eager to remember nothing unpleasant today. The canopy shone with that particular arrogance of white in sunlight. The platform had a new sheen. A lock, if you knew how to see it. Sitting like an idea that had been told it was beautiful and believed it. They took their places. Rin drifted along the edge with a basket of rolls and a businesslike smile. Arya stood at the left arch with the exact face of a woman who will let you through if you tell a good enough lie. Tess tucked herself by a vent with dust in her fist and patience in her jaw. Selvi joined a line of singers in the third row. Neatly out of the way, where support happens. Naruto walked into the square as if he had promised someone he would. Vera stepped up like a lack of announcement as a kind of humility. The crowd did that hush people do when they want drama and hope it doesn't make a mess. The priests took their places and the platform glowed with permission. Selvi drew breath. Arya tapped her wrist. Tess lifted her hand. Rin nodded at Naruto from across a sea of heads. Naruto climbed the platform. He didn't do it fast. He did it like a man who had been told to stand somewhere and decided to follow orders for once. Two priests made protest noises. A guard reached. Naruto reached back and took the guard's hand and set it aside with the sort of tenderness that feels like a threat. Vera turned. Surprise as mild as weather. You are early, she said. I'm ordinary, Naruto said. We get places before the interesting people so we can save them a spot. You had your word removed, she said. You came anyway. Names live in people, he said. Not in ledgers. It should have sounded like a slogan. It didn't. It sounded like a man who had seen it proved too many times to get poetic about it. Selvi sang. The platform's lock twitched. Arya's plate hummed and the left arch forgot it was a door and remembered it had been a tree once, and trees prefer not to move when told. Tess blew dust, long and fine and hateful of tidy edges. Rin clapped a rhythm that made the crowd think of their own hearts. Vera lifted her hand. The white name rose like a fish cresting a river. It arced toward the center of the platform where miracles are meant to happen because audiences like symmetry. Naruto stepped aside. He stepped to the very edge. He made the city the stage. The white name hesitated. Its lock had no latch on the edge. It reached for the center again and found Selvi's counterline, not defiant, simply insistently off by a delicate amount. It looked for a place to stand. It found Rin's rhythm behind it, out among the people, and thought that might be home. It faltered, not confused. Confusion is messy. This was something else. It was undecided. Vera dropped her hand like a gavel. The white name split. It didn't split into violence. It split like light when it goes through a dirty window and remembers everything has texture. It spilled over the square, touching G's shoulders and hands and the backs of necks and the feel of 100 small brave things that add up to a day worth having. It tried to grab Rasengan and failed because it doesn't live on the tip of a hand. It lives in every time Naruto had kept that hand open instead of closed. It reached for the word for clone and brushed a boy in the crowd handing his bread to his sister and decided that might be what it meant. Vera's mantle flared hard. She forced the name to narrow. It swung like a lantern in a wind she did not like. She looked at Naruto and what might have been admiration looked like anger in her mouth. Then the theocracy did what institutions do when a miracle misbehaves. It ordered a human solution. Guards surged from the sides. Not zealots, professionals. The crowd made that ND crowds make when their morning turns into an afternoon they will never be able to forget. The first guard aimed for Selvi's throat because strategy is efficiency plus cruelty. Rin was faster, but not by enough. Naruto moved as if a string had been pulled through his chest. He didn't reach for Rasengan. He didn't have it. He didn't need it. He tackled the guard mid-step and turned the man's weak HT into a roll that put him safely under the platform and made Naruto a target. He rose into two more, snapped a wrist gently, broke a spear without making a point of it. The bracers hummed like they believed in him. Take him, someone shouted. Not Vera. Vera watched. Her face had not been taught how to ask for help. Zeshi appeared at the edge of the square like a conclusion. She did not run. She did not say anyone's name. She moved toward the platform through a path the crowd made without realizing it had made it. The halberd rested in her palm like a conversation. Rin swore under her breath. Arya pressed her lips together because she had run out of sarcasm and that rarely happened. Tessa's fists closed on dust as if she could punch air. Selvi sang one note that would have shattered GL. As if belief didn't keep glass busy. Zeshi vaulted to the platform. Naruto turned to meet her because you turn toward certain things, not away. She didn't strike. She planted the butt of her halberd. Leaned in close enough that only he could hear, and said, "You still buying tomorrow's?" "Every one I can afford," he said. She nodded once as if that answer had money in it. Then she turned and slashed at the nearest guard's spear. Cutting without killing, cleaning the path like a woman who had decided mercy was a better weapon for this hour because it breaks scripts. "Traitor," a priest hissed. "Efficient," Zeshi said, and her eyes, when they touched Naruto's, had heat like a blade set near a flame. The square reeled. The white name shivered, unlatched. Vera's hand trembled for the first time. She steadied it. She's not a woman who drops things. But she had to look at Naruto now like he was not a problem but a proof. Enough, she said, low, as if to herself. Then, in a voice the square could live by, enough. The guards stopped because stopping is sometimes harder than running and they wanted to be forgiven. Not today, Vera said to the platform, to the canopy, to the name, to Naruto. Not like this. She closed her hand. The canopy went still. The platform remembered it was wood. The square remembered it was full of people who needed to get home before their bread went stale. Rin's knees almost gave out with relief. Selvi swayed, then remained. She remained the way a note remains when the song is over and you still hear it. Arya let her plates sleep with a pat like they were cats. Tess wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, furious at them for being eyes. It would have been a neat end, too neat for a story anyone would trust. The theocracy is not good at tidy endings under pressure. It does better with new beginnings written as threats. A choir priest stepped forward with a barbed brand. He pressed it to the air in front of himself and it left a mark. She burned on nothing and then on something. Naruto's jacket, Rin's sleeves, Selvi's throat, Arya's plate case, Tessa's hammer head. The marks looked like starbursts if stars were also handcuffs. Heretics, he said, with the joy of a man who has found a label. The crowd inhaled. Names weigh more when they're freshly printed. Rin's jaw went tight. Arya smiled without humor. Tess cracked her neck. Selv. I put her hand to the place where the brand sat without heat and refused to flinch. Naruto looked at the priest and the brand and the square and Vera and the way the city's attention had tilted toward him like it had been told to. He lifted his chin and spoke the way you speak when you need the sound to belong to the person you're buying time for, not to yourself. You're right, he said, and the square leaned harder because what idiot admits it? We're guilty of standing where people could see us. We're guilty of being ordinary in public. We're guilty of making your miracle spill. He grinned, not kind. We'll pay. It wasn't noble, it was strategic. He drew the attention and set it on his shoulders and watched Rin exhale a fraction because drawing attention is a job and she couldn't do it and command the exits at the same time. She signaled with a twitch of fingers. Her people moved. Vera watched him the way a mountain might watch a river try to cut a new path. You love your tricks, she said. And for the first time something like tiredness crept into her voice. Tomorrow will cost more. I'll bring more, he said. He backed away off the platform like a man leaving a negotiate. Ion that had accidentally become personal. Zeshi made no move to stop him. She had chosen her complication and would keep it. Guards shifted and found that shifting into permission was easier when Halberd had just flirted with your jugular. They didn't run. They walked. Rin made sure of that. Walking tells a crowd that you won't make them choose between cowardice and kindness. Running makes people feel they have to pick. They threaded out of the square like a rumor that knew where it was going. On the far side, in the shade of a hackberry tree that had been planted by someone with taste and not enough water, Argent landed with the delicacy of a confession. The crystal eye dimmed and brightened, taking them in. The brand on their skin, the dust in their hair, the shape of the day they had just broken. You are now officially inconvenient, the proxy said. Rin looked at the mark on her sleeve. Fashionable, she said. Do we get a discount? Absolutely not, Arya said. Branded goods cost extra. Tess snorted. Selvi lifted her hand from her throat and looked at the imprint. It's not hot, she said, curious and calm. It is a story, the proxy said. It will try to make people tell itself. Naruto breathed once, in and out. He met the blank helm where a face should be. Then we tell a better one. Will you help? Rin asked the proxy, blunt. I will not hinder, the proxy said. And I will observe. If the hollow seraph reaches beyond what she has been allotted, I will act. Until then, the future is watching you decide it. Big of it, Rin said. Selvi looked at the basilica and then at Naruto. We should not wait, she said. Not because urgency is dramatic. Because she had learned what happens when days sit and grow teeth. We won't, Naruto said. We make a coalition. Dwarves, merchants, cowards. Brave fools, a cantor with a soft voice, a knight in silver who doesn't know how to stop measuring. We take their stage and turn it inside out. And if the name comes for your name again? Arya asked. Naruto held up his hand and watched the skin catch light like it had nothing better to do. Then I'll use my hands, he said. I've got to. Rin nodded once like she'd chosen to let that be enough. Tess clapped him on the shoulder so hard he took a step and pretended he meant to. Selvi smiled, small and whole. The proxy tilted its head in that way that meant it had recorded something it would call data and a person would call faith. Tomorrow, Rin said. Tomorrow, Naruto agreed, and the word didn't hurt when it left his mouth, which was a small miracle of its own. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Sky That Stays. Morning came armored. Banners the color of bone unfurled along the basilica's cornice, their edges catching sun like teeth. The choir houses bled out streams of white-robed bodies until the streets looked like someone had tipped a jar of salt into the crowd. Rumor ran ahead of the procession, agile as a stray dog. It said there would be a miracle. It said the miracle would be clean. It said, in undertones, that the city should be grateful to be washed. Rin stood in a market doorway under a string of paper charms and pinched the bridge of her nose like she could press order into a day from the outside. All right, she said, more to humor than to hope. Rolls check. If anyone's going to be a fool, do it where I can see you. Define fool, Arya murmured, adjusting the leather strap of a satchel stuffed with plates and a folded coil of glimmering wire. I like to calibrate. Anything that makes me have to start a religion to explain you, Rin said. Then I'll be secular, Arya said, smug, and flicked a plate to make it hum. The tone sank into the alley brick with a satisfied sigh, a sleeper finding the cool spot on the pillow. Tess was all square shoulders and stubborn jaw. Two dwarven foremen loomed at her back, each a different geometry of grit, one heavy and round as a barrel, one tall for his kind, with arms like door lintel. And a forehead creased in receipts nobody could cheat. The three of them wore work leathers scarred by decades of arguments with physics. Their faces said only, try me. Selvi sat on a stoop and tied the laces of a little girl's shoe. The girl inhaled like a bird and shot away. Selvi watched her go with a chest that rose and fell just once in a way that might have been prayer if she had still owed anyone obedience. The canter she had ridden, narrow-faced, hair a crown of gray pins, arrived with a mouth that knew both lullabies and outsized truths. When she took Selvi's palm, the same joy and dread crossed both their faces. So you finally came to work, the older woman said. Selvi nodded. They both smiled like daughters and mothers traded places. And Naruto, uniform of a man who never learned how to keep his hands still, leaned against the half-open shutters with the sun in his hair and a grin that wasn't camouflage so much as defiance with a sense of humor. The bracers hummed warmly at his wrists, alive to the city's pulse. You remember you're the decoy and not the bomb, Rin said. I'm a multi-purpose tool, he said solemnly. Like a spork. You're intolerable, she said, and her hand on his sleeve didn't let go. Then the street took a breath the size of a bell. The first of the white-clad choir masters appeared under the arch of the western gate, not a march so much as a glide. Behind them came priest administrators with ringed hands and long mouths, and a cordon of soldiers in quiet plate. The platform in the square had grown fat overnight, a skeletal cage of pale ribs icing to cradle a throne made of nothing interrogated until it called itself light. 100 thin cords of belief tied it to the basilica's ribs. Vera stepped onto it like a woman stepping onto her porch, familiar, unannounced. No one cheered. Cheering would have been vulgar. The square merely leaned closer, and the leaning sounded like a held note. Argent's shadow crossed a rooftop far away and stilled. Measuring. Go, Rin said, rolling her shoulders as if loosening them might keep them from breaking. We crack the stage, not the people. They moved. Rin walked the market edge, buying and refusing to be cheated. Leaving a breadcrumb path of ordinary. Coins changing hands, someone scolding a boy into, please, an apple split with two thumbs and shared across the line dividing, ours, from, theirs. Tess threaded herself and her foreman into the scaffolds of an unfinished shrine like a woman who had always believed religion should hold weight if it wants to be taken seriously. Arya's hands were a blur on doorframes and balustrades, laying traps that didn't look like traps, a lace of not yet magic that would rip the seam allowance out of any hymn that tried to hold on. Selvi slipped into the choir's third rank and took the breath of the entire square into her chest like a borrowed instrument, thin shoulders straightening as if she'd just remembered a promise. Naruto climbed onto a stone lion and sat, casual as a man waiting for a friend at a cafe. A child pointed. A guard glared. The crowd realized it had a main character and sat up straighter. The brand on his jacket prickled. A narrative trying itself on for size. He dusted it like lint. You don't get to write the end, he told it under his breath. Vera lifted a hand with a generosity that would have been misread as humility by anyone who hadn't seen her erase a miracle by speaking the right noun. The belief cords trembled from the basilica's ribs to the throne's thin armrests. She sat. The throne held her aloft, without any visible support, just the kind of consensus that turns ideas into roads and expects you to be grateful. Selvi sang the grounding note, the one that told a square full of strangers where their feet were. The choir answered. The white name began to open, articulate, precise, an oyster refusing to acknowledge it was at all biological. Arya touched a plate and a ripple of silence rolled around the base of the basilica. Stripping verbs out of a dozen whispered commands. Tessa's dwarves knocked their knuckles against stone in a cadence older than faith and more honest, somewhere underfoot. Bolts considered their contracts and found wiggle room. Rin tipped her head at a baker, who promptly started handing out rolls at a loss, the kind of economic obscenity that collapses ideology. Today, Vera said, not to the crowd, not to a god, to the apparatus itself, we cleanse pride. It sounded practical and sincere and monstrous. Naruto inhaled until his lungs hurt. The bracers steadied like hands between his shoulder blades. He stood on the lion's back and looked out across the square and saw faces. Nervous ones, obedient ones, bought ones, bored ones, Selvies, with that aching ordinary bee. Ravery that knows it will have to go home afterward and make soup. Hey, he called, too loud for decorum. The sound of a boy interrupting a class because he'd brought the wrong homework but the right heart. People startled. My name's Naruto. It was stupid to announce that, in a place where names were purchase orders. He said it anyway, a small bright insurrection. The crowd looked so the name wouldn't pretend it had an object and not a person. Vera's eyes found him with that unhurried tilt of the head. Her mantle of light didn't so much flare as redeclare itself. You were unwise enough to return, she said, not unkindly. Optimist, he said. Anomaly, she corrected, as if they could split the difference and still be at odds. He stepped down from the lion into the press of bodies and moved like a man who believed he could be a bridge between people who had been told they should never touch. He squeezed a shoulder here, plucked a child bodily out of the way there, bent to pick up an old man's cane and handed it back with a nod that meant, I see you. As he moved, the bracers hummed in his bones, the world consented to the small manipulations of gravity that turned a spill into a stumble, and he learned, again. Always, that kindness is a jutsu too. The choir's first chord landed. The name opened like a letter written to a future that would rather have flowers. It looked for some thing to erase so people's hearts would feel tidy. Selvi's counterline tilted it, allowed it to be beautiful without being obedient. Vera's fingers tightened on air. Rin clapped a syncopation that did not belong in church, and 100 bodies in the verandas began unconsciously clapping with her, offbeat, badly, gloriously human. Arya lofted a plate under the platform, the sigil in it tasted the lock on the idea of stage, and made a face. Tessa's foreman leaned their weight into the scaffolds and, exactly when foreman weight becomes opinion, 2 support wedges slipped an inch. Now, Rin said, and Naruto didn't hear her but his body did. He split. Clones burst from him. Not smoke, not static, but a soft ripple like a lot of people agreeing at once that they would try. They ran, not toward the guards or onto the stage, but into the crowd. One caught a crate before it toppled a fruit seller. One held a door a beat longer so an old woman could make dignity look like speed. One laughed with a child because she had been told not to and did it anyway. One stepped into the path of a guard who had lifted his spear out of fear rather than courage and lowered it with a look that said, it's all right to not be a hero today. The name reached, baffled, if a miracle capable of obliteration could be baffled, at the multiplication of its object into acts. It tried to seize Rasengan, but the syllable, E slipped off hands that were busy doing other things. It tried for clone, encountered 100 tiny, self-contained mercies, and got lost. Vera rose on the throne. Light folded under her as if the apparatus thought it was the floor. The mantle hardened into plates so thin they were almost manners. She took the stolen syllable of Rasengan into her palm and showed him the absence just to make sure he knew she held it. Then she looked past him, and the looking moved like weather. Tessa's dust rose in a column from a vent and swirled around the base of the throne like an incooperative incense. Belief slid on it. She grinned, teeth white in a face smudged with forge. "Chew on that," she muttered, and the dwarf foremen set themselves, as if they could physically hold up an idea, and maybe they could. A bell rang incorrectly. Rin's eyes snapped to the tower and found a boy in a page's tunic grinning down at her with the specific glee of an accomplice who did exactly what he was told he shouldn't. She kissed 2 fingers and tossed the kiss his way like a coin, then shoved into the square and began handing rolls to everyone who shouted heretic too loudly. It made shouting with your mouth full deliciously difficult. Arya's plates flared, lit, went dull, flared again as she fought a war you could only see when you knew what to look for. Matching resonance, unpicking anchors, scraping AD. Or clean so it can't be opened by a word. Sweat beaded at her hairline. She smiled anyway because her math was working. The first wave broke. Soldiers tight in formation, faces set to do not think. Zeshi slid between them, not hurting in ways that would fail to kill later, just editing commitment. The halberd's back end knocked a knee, not breaking, teaching. The blade kissed a spear shaft into splinters and kept moving so no one had a chance to mistake skill for cruelty. She backed into Naruto's shoulder in a way that counted as affection in her language. "Still buying," she murmured. "Bulk," he said. His grin made her lips almost answer. Then she turned her head because the square had decided it wanted a different story and she wanted to see if it was brave enough to tell it. Vera rose higher. The throne wasn't made of wood or gold. It was made of people deciding to be tidy. It escalated the way Isekai'd is when you don't contradict it. She lifted her hand, and the name focused into a lance. "Footwork," Selvi whispered. Nonsense in the context of a hymn, except that you could feel it. The pivot she knitted under the pitch made the crowd's weight shift. She sang the platform's lock off 1 degree. Arya shoved a plate under it. The wedge the foreman had nudged earlier decided suddenly to travel. The throne lurched a hair. Vera didn't fall. She doesn't do that, she corrected. But in the moment of correction, Argent landed. A silver shape on the reinforcement post at the basilica's corner. Hands out, palms open, catching backwash and bottling it in a crystal eye. A dozen priests looked up. Remembering to be frightened of something other than blasphemy, their hymns thinned where they should have thickened. The lance came for Naruto. Not just for him, for everything around I am that answered to Naruto. The way he laughed too loud, the way he put his body where people needed a wall, the stupid orange jacket that marked him like a flag. It came for the center of a story and tried to pull it like a thread so the rest would fall apart. He ran at it. He didn't have the comfort of his favorite trick. The bracers told him where the ground's generosity stretched. He put his heel there and pushed. He didn't deflect the lance with strength. He insulted it with audacity. It grazed his side, enough heat to take breath, not enough to take narrative. He snapped upright in time to grab a guard by the collar before the man's forward momentum sent him face first into the throne's lowest rung. He spun the guard out, set him on his feet like a scolded child, and was moving again. "Idiot," Rin muttered lovingly, and flung a roll that coroned off a choir master's ear with the perfect thunk of irreverence. The priest flinched and forgot his note. The symmetry broke. Selvi slid her tone into the new gap like a stitch. "Now," Arya said, and the wire in her satchel uncoiled as if she'd whispered its true name. She tossed it high. It arced like a comet, when it landed around the throne's lower braces. It sang a scale that only metal hears. Argent's gauntlet flared, acknowledging the message. The crystal eye re-aimed and swallowed more backwash. Tess hauled a barrel to the say of the western buttress with the foreman and pounded the bung in with a mallet that had broken more stones than laws. It wasn't full of powder. That would have been the wrong kind of loud. It was of a paste that ate at the resin lines binding belief to place. She smeared it with a grim smile. "Chew faster," she told the miracle, and slapped a rune to make the paste decide it deserved to be permanent. Vera saw the shift as a queen sees a slur whispered 15 tables away. Her eyes went to Tess. Not a rival, Not a target, an inconvenience, important enough to notice. She raised her hand. Zeshi stepped in between the hand and the dwarf without hesitation and cut the gesture in half with the blunt back of her halberd. The motion wasn't violent, it was correction. Vera's eyes slid to her and, cleanly, added a new category to the world. You will be punished, a choir official hissed at Zeshi. His rings flashed. He was sweating. I'm being efficient, Zeshi said, and it was almost, a smile. Naruto landed on the platform. He hadn't planned to. Plans had decided to be theory today. His boots slapped the wood like a promise forced into the wrong tense. Vera tilted her head toward him as if he were a new melody and she wasn't sure whether to harmonize or consume. Return what you took, he said. It has gone home already, she said. Names elasticize. But it will be back in my pocket the moment you lean on it. He smiled, tired and easy and somehow still generous. Then I won't lean. He moved, and it looked like he was dancing because the disbelief of the square needed an excuse. He wasn't. He was working. He punched once. Not at Vera, at the pillar of air that pretended to hold up the throne. It twanged and tasted like evasive bureaucracy. He kicked twice. On. E-strike hitting clean against a lock that wasn't mechanical, the other missing on purpose so the guard behind him would duck and discover he wanted to live more than he wanted to arrest. He didn't summon a sphere. He summoned a choice, over and over, offered to a crowd the way you offer bread. Selvi's voice braided his steps, reinforcement underfoot. The older cantor put her palm to the stone ling of the arch and sang one note that sounded like a mother telling a house to hold together a bit longer. Arya's wire cinched, and the plate beneath the platform hiccuped the way a throat does when a liar swallows. Tessa's pace hardened into contempt. Vera stood up close. She wasn't an angel. She was a woman held together by purpose, good at it, beautiful the way discipline is beautiful for a while and then goes brittle. Hollow. Yes. Not empty. She looked at Naruto as if trying to find a polite way to say why are you like this? You confuse people, she said. You make mercy look possible. Then they die. Not if we help, he said, and it wasn't a speech. It was a thesis written with skinned knuckles. Anomalies don't get to choose the scale of their stories, Vera said. You will not be allowed to be small. He nodded. Then I'll be many. He split again. The clones burst. Not flamboyant. Not for show. 50, 100, 200, each one barely a body of chakra, barely a boy. They didn't swarm. They fanned out into the square and began the stubborn work of building a stage out of strangers, kneeling to tie laces, tossing bread back into a vendor's hands to make him remember selling is holy. Making jokes so bad men couldn't keep their mouths in the shape for chanting hate. A few ran to the rooftops and started clapping with the wrong rhythm until the right one was the wrong one and the wrong one was the city's instead. One bumped a soldier with his shoulder and said, "Sorry," like he meant it. The soldier blinked and said, "It's all right," like he hadn't said those words since a childhood winter. Vera drew belief toward herself to stiffen the throne. Argent's eye drank the overflow. Rin's ledger brain clicked. She widened the gap between cost and payoff. Keep your coin, love, she told a woman reaching for a purchase she couldn't afford. Pay me back by singing off key. The woman laughed and did exactly that, a note so awful it was cure, not disease. A surge. Then, a choir phalanx with relic sensors that tried to shear off possibilities. Arya snapped both wrists, flinging plates. Sigils climbed the pillars like ivy and ate the roots of the relic vapor. S's foremen brought their hammers down. Not on heads, on the ground, a percussion that rewrote the beat of a march into a shimmy. Selvi lifted the congregation 1 degree toward decision. The older Tor stepped forward into a line of shields like someone going out to hang laundry and the men in the line stepped back in the ancient recognition of their grandmothers. Enough, Vera said, but this time it wasn't order. It was wish. Naruto wasn't winning. He wasn't losing, which disgusted certain gods. He was doing what he'd always done, borrowing the future from tomorrow to pay for today. Vera reached. The mantle flared. She hooked 2 fingers and pulled on his name. Naruto. Not the technique, not the trick, the idea that he combined them into a person who made a mess and somehow made it better. The bracers bit deep, runes searing cold. Tessa's artistry kept his bones. Arya's net kept the reach from stealing his lines. Selvy's tone kept his feet where the world could find them. He felt the pull like a tide under a riptide. He yielded just enough to not rip, then leaned against the pull as if it were a friend who wanted him to dance before he was ready. Let go, Vera said, almost soft. It will be kinder. He shook his head. Kindness without choice is embalming. The first clone dispelled. Near a boy who had been counting stones in the dust to pretend he wasn't afraid. The clone's release popped and left behind nothing anyone could measure except the way the boy looked up at his mother and said, "It's okay," and believed it. The second clone popped near a stall where a woman had been standing over her bread with suspicion and sat down at last. The city began to keep the name when the clones died. Not Naruto, that would have been bad business for a crowd. The name of the thing he was doing. Being ordinary on purpose, 300 times until it stuck. Vera saw it. Her hands tightened. The throne rose as if trying to get above weather. The chords of belief strummed. Song. Eating old inside the basilica's stones decided to stop humoring the pretense that miracles don't use foundations. A low crack ran along the stage's second rib. Tess whooped. The foreman grinned meanly. A choir master shouted himself hoarse. A soldier raised a baton. A child cried. Someone laughed at the wrong time and the crowd agreed to call it the right one. The square turned into a machine built to metabolize fear into noise. Zeshi cut 2 spears and then, deliberately, knelt, just long enough that a ring of guards kept their weapons lowered out of respect or confusion. Between those two there is no daylight. She rose into a cut that told a story. I am choosing. Pick sides cleanly or get out of the way. Argent lifted both hands, dropping from the buttress into open air. The crystal eye flared wide and drank up the slosh. The institutional overflow, the part of the name that wasn't the name but the mess it made when it was badly aimed. It took from a different side now, not just excess, stolen syllables. There is a particular taste to theft when it arrives dressed as administration. It gathered it and caged it in, though no one could see, carried it aside to a place where later it could be released without killing anyone. Selvy did the hardest thing she had ever done. She changed songs in the middle of the same song and made everyone sound good anyway. Let go, Vera said again, and it wasn't a threat. It was almost tender. I am tired of erasing things that insist on being beautiful. I am tired of being told beautiful is a sin, Selvy said, voice steady now, almost smiling. Sing with me, Vera. That startled the square enough to make space for the idea. Vera looked at Selvy as one looks at a door that wasn't there a moment ago. It was not mockery. It was ache. A tiny one, but real. You're the hollow seraph, Naruto said softly. He had blood in his mouth and gratitude in his eyes and the idiot's belief that if he kept talking to a person instead of a role, it would matter. What hollowed you? Hunger, she said as if confessing to a diet. The kind that happens when a god leaves and a city decides they deserve an altar anyway. He nodded. Okay, he said. Then we eat, all at once. He clapped. Stupid, theatrical, honest. Rin laughed across a mouthful of roll. Arya shook her head and smirked. Tess spat into her palm like a superstition and grabbed a brace. The foreman hammered a joke into the stone. The boy on the bell hit it wrong on purpose and the wrong became taste. Vera pulled hard. The name squeezed. Naruto could have reached for Rasengan. And maybe, the syllable would have been there again because tricks are elastic. He didn't. He did something worse. Everybody look at someone else, he shouted. And say their name. It was chaos. It was a genius of exactly the wrong sort and the right one. 100 voices called names. Some were wrong and corrected gently. Some were pet names, embarrassing and powerful. Some were curses turned inside out by use. Mira, Anselm, Bone, Mom. Someone shouted Naruto, and the square laughed with him, not at him, which is rarer than fire and is useful. The name that deletes names tried to become selective. It failed because the concept of stage moved under it, out into the crowd, onto rooftops, into bread hands. Arya's wire sang and the lock unseated. Tess's paste cured and rejected every pretty latch. Argent's eye closed, full of stolen nouns like a pocket full of marbles, and then opened empty, release accomplished elsewhere, safe. Vera's throne lowered without anyone telling it to. She didn't fall. She stepped down. I can still take your word, she said, have to assure herself. You can, Naruto said through a grin that had nothing triumphant in it. I'll teach the city a different one. Who taught you this? She asked. It was not enough of a question to absolve her. It was close. Lonely boys, he said. Hungry women. Old men with quiet hands. A shopkeeper who split an oran. GE with me when he didn't have one to split. He gestured at the square. Them. They're very good teachers. Zeshi stood at his shoulder and, in the notch between two beats of shared attention, she made her choice official. She turned and cut the brand priest's staff at the wrist end, spared him the hand, and said, very close, you point at me again and I will decide efficiency is loud. The priest wet himself. The crowd understood what had just been purchased. So did Vera. She raised her hands not in surrender but in a shape that could be read as it if you needed to end the day. Then listen, Selvi whispered. Because this was the only angle that didn't taste like victory. She sang a release. It was not their hymn. It was not the theocracy's proud name. It was something else. The sound of letting go without condemning. It reached into Vera and found a bright, painful knot. The faith fragment burned into muscle memory and made rigid by praise. She could have fought it. She did not. Or one breath she believed the thing she had been asked. That releasing is not erasing. The fragment came out of her gently. Argent's gauntlet closed. The crystal eye held it like a firefly cupped in hands. Arya's wire slackened. Tess exhaled noise she'd been holding for a year. Rin's laughter broke wrong and right at once and she took a shaky step that ended with her hand on Naruto's back. The throne collapsed. Not into ruin. Into absence. The platform sat there, embarrassed to be wood. The name, deprived of lock and lure and show and cruelty, forgot. Not everything, miracles are stubborn, but Nah, that it stopped feeling like a weapon and started feeling like a story told badly. The choir stood sweating and confused, bodies remembering fatigue they'd been too righteous to own. Guards low, read their weapons because laying down weight often feels like a bonus you weren't promised. The crowd, deprived of spectacle, had to decide whether to eat. Many did. That saved lives. Vera swayed lick. A woman stepping out of a too-hot bath. Hollow remained. For the first time in the day that hollow was not a verdict, it was a space that might be filled with something that wasn't obedience. She low, awked at Naruto and Selvi and Zeshi and, briefly, Rin with coin-bright eyes measuring a ledger she had not been trained for. You'll ruin them, she said softly. With hope. It's dangerous. Everything worth keeping is, Rin said briskly, coughing to disguise the way her voice had gone unprofessional. We'll have meetings. And knives. Selvi stepped forward and asked the only question the moment could hold without making it a sermon. Will you leave? She asked Vera. Not forever, Vera said. I may need to see what kindness costs in neighborhoods where the rent is due. She looked up at the basilica as if it had been both shelter and cage. I will return when I am less sure. Good, Arya said dryly. We're allergic to certainty. Zeshi's halberd dipped, just a fraction, in acknowledge and to a rival who had been more than that for an hour. Next time, she told Naruto, when you pick a fight, don't make it so interesting that the clean kill gets lost. I'll try, he said. He wouldn't. A roar rolled up the street from the market, confused, cheerful, appalled. The brand marks on Naruto's jacket and Rin's sleeve and Selvi's throat and Arya's case and Tessa's hammer didn't fade. They changed. Tilted by use. Touched by the day. They read not heretic, not to anyone who had been here and would be telling this story. They read here. It would infuriate men with rings and nourish old women who liked to be a little rude. Argent stepped down from the post, the silver of the armor catching color for a rare moment and keeping it. Measurement concluded, the voice said, and then, softer. Almost an opinion. Acceptable variance. Translate, Rin demanded. You didn't break the future, Arya said, covering her own relief. We only dented the arrogance around it. Dents make things honest, Tess said. Especially pots. Selvi put 2 fingers to her throat where the mark sat like a second pulse. She wasn't smiling. She was not smiling. We should go, she said, practical again. Because someone had to bring the universe back inside the body. Before someone decides to be brave the wrong way. They moved through the crowd like people accustomed to dodging praise. Hands reached. They squeezed a few, deflected most. Naruto let a child touch the bracer because somebody should always be allowed to touch the magic before the world prices it. Rin snatched a meat skewer off a street. And left coins because you respect the dignity of vendors. Arya gathered her wire like a cat that had done a trick and wanted to pretend it was dignity all along. Tess shouldered the paste barrel. And announced she'd be charging the basilica for cleanup. Two dwarves laughed like men who believe in invoices. Zeshi balanced the halberd across her shoulders and drifted ahead, clearing a path by existing. At the hackberry tree beyond the square, they stopped because stopping is part of leaving alive. People were still laughing, crying, swearing, eating. The theocracy's crisis managers were already rewriting talking points into excuses. You could smell the ink. But the air tasted different. Less like bleach, more like rain considered and cancelled. Rin leaned against the tree and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, the capable was back, like a proof. Roots Guild, she said, as if dropping a stone in a river so it would know where to move. I'm going to start one. People who need to get somewhere without being seen by men with rings give me coin and trust and I deliver them with both still in their pockets. We use Tessa's tunnels. We use Arya's dumb magic. We use sell these songs to make guards think they're on lunch. We stick. You hate heroes, Naruto said, as if making sure she had not discovered she liked them. I hate leaving, she corrected. Heroics are just leaving with a title. You, she poked his chest. Don't lie to me. You will go. I will build corridors. Between us, maybe nobody gets erased on the way. That's the pitch, he said, throat thick. Tess bumped her shoulder to his. You got a knack for making floors cooperate, she said. Come to the Ironvale halls after you teach these paper chasers what a road costs. I have ideas. Runes that need stubborn hands. And apprentices who need to see a man eat and work in the same hour so they know it can be done. I'll bring bread, he said. Bring jokes, she said. They hate them. That's how you know they're useful. Arya rolled a plate across her knuckles. I have a backlog of petty grudges against relic engineers and a thesis to write, on the elasticity of name theft in civic spaces. I'll need a field assistant who is impossibly polite to old ladies and criminally rude to thrones. She flicked him a look. Interested. Criminally, he said. Selvi stepped close without fanfare and took his hand between both of hers. It was not romance. It was acknowledgement. Without you, she said, I would have sung my obedience in prettier words. With you, I sang what I wanted. He swallowed. You did that without me, he said. I just clapped badly. You were loud enough, she said, and her smile showed shy teeth. Zeshi stood in a light that wasn't forgiving and looked at him like a duel that might be a promise if either of them were worse at lying. Someday, she said, we test your mercy when it's inconvenient. He nodded. Someday, he agreed. Under a kinder sky, she lifted the halberd in a gesture that read as farewell if you could read her script. She turned and walked east, through a city busy relearning the names of its streets. Argent's helm inclined. The crystal eye was dim. Empty or full, only a god and an engineer could tell. The hollow seraph will not be erased, the voice said. She is dispersed. She will reform in ideas that require her. You have shifted the timeline of that need. I'll take late, Rin said. You will be watched, the proxy added to Naruto, as if it hadn't been true since birth. Tell the watcher to clap off beat, he said. It helps. The silver figure rose with that refusal to bow to gravity that is either physics or style. The shadow passed over them and then wasn't, and the city looked more honest for the subtraction. They walked. The boarding house smelled like soup and relief and wet clothes drying on lines. Children ran between knees and somehow no one told them to stop. The landlady took one look at the brand on Rin's sleeve, sniffed, and threw a clean towel at her with the accuracy of long love. They washed, ate badly, laughed too late, slept, woke, planned. Life boiled water and poured it into teacups and, for a while, that was the point. Naruto climbed to the roof at dawn, out of habit and because roofs have always been his conversations with God, even when he didn't know the name. The city stretched, bones and smoke and new stories. A gull argued with a taller bird above the basilica. The brand on his jacket's cuff caught the light. He touched it the way you touch a scar you chose. Rin slid beside him smelling like clean linen and plans. She leaned on the parapet and the city leaned back. Well, she asked. Tomorrow, he said. Always, she said. We have 2 caravans to get out, 3 priests to convert gently to anonymity. And an accountant who thinks he's a smuggler to humiliate into competence. Also, I found a boy who wants to be a messenger. I told him I don't hire liars. He lied poorly. I loved it. He starts at noon. He grinned, helpless. I like this version of you. This is all the versions, she said. Paste them together with humor or we complain to management. He watched the basilica for a while. Vera would be inside somewhere, not vanquished, exactly, disassembled, curious against her will, learning how to live inside a day that wasn't script. He hoped she got hungry for something other than control. He hoped she found the guy who makes soup right and asked him how. Rin bumped his shoulder with hers once, a punctuation he felt to his heels. Say it, she said. What? The thing you say when you're going to pick a fight with whatever's next and you want people to think you're a fool and not a person with a plan. He breathed, then laughed, then obliged. Let's find the next hard thing. Good boy, she said, far too fond. We will. The sun took the city the way it always does, without negotiating, without apology. On a parapet above a market where people clapped badly on purpose. A boy who could be many and a woman who could make plans out of weather stood and let themselves be human for a minute. The sky didn't fall, it stayed. Chapter 5 End.